just come forward, please? Thank you. Ah, looks so tiny little thing. I didn't. Do I need to get it? Okay. How long is your video?
So I think it's only 2 minutes.
Which year?
Vrai.
Adieu.
Directement pour le président? Non.
Also, nicht direkt, ne? Man muss,
On vote pour le Parlement, pas pour le président.
Tu connais ce truc-là, toi?
Attends, quoi?
Recommencer.
Est-ce que c'est un poisson?
Je crois que c'est ça, et on en fait des bons sushis.
Je crois pas que ce soit ça.
Si vous le dites.
false.
He will be the first one on the European list.
C'est déjà le cas avec M. Juncker, d'ailleurs, on l'a déjà eu.
Non, il n'y aurait pas une partie européenne.
Je ne sais pas si ça existe déjà.
Oui. Enfin, non, pas vraiment.
Un parti européen et des partis pro-européens.
Des contre des socialistes, j'imagine.
Si, ils existent, mais il nous faut des listes européennes. Moi, je suis pour.
True.
Je suppose que c'est vrai.
Il n'y a pas.
Je ne pense pas qu'on soit au niveau qu'il faudrait.
I think so.
Dovrebbe, non lo so, sì, spero di sì.
Hélas, non.
Attends, c'était quand les dernières?
Ah, false.
True. Moi je dirais vrai, mais vero.
True.
Mes parents sont hongrois, je suis de nationalité belge, je suis avec une néo-zélandaise et je me sens très attaché à l'Union européenne.
Écoutez, à mon âge, on a vécu la période 39-45. Alors je vote pour l'Europe.
That was funny, wasn't it? I suppose so. Those were some of the rather interesting answers there. So, welcome to the Mayor of Ghent, who I saw this morning. I'm glad you're here. You made it. And do you know what? I'm very glad I didn't get a lift with you. Huh? If I'd had a lift with you, I'd only just got here. So, welcome, esteemed speakers, ladies and gentlemen, students of the College of Europe. Good afternoon to those of you here with me in Bruges, and of course those of you joining us online from the Nathalin campus and from elsewhere. A very, very warm welcome to this conference organised by the S&D Group, Democratic Participation in the upcoming 2019, yes it is 2019, European Parliament elections. That's true. Now, the title couldn't be clearer in terms of what we're here to discuss. So, first of all, very simple, let's do a bit of exercise. Raise your right hand if you are at the right event. Are you sure you're where you're supposed to be? Okay, already there's some disobedience in the House. I had nods instead of raised right hands, but I'm glad. Raise your left hand if you've merely sneaked in for the free dinner afterwards. That doesn't bode well that the two people in the comms department have done that. Okay, my name is Katrina Sickle, and I'm really delighted to be your moderator. In fact, what's quite strange is this morning I was moderating in the hemicycle of the European Parliament with the President of the Parliament, and I can tell you this is way more intimidating in a small room with lots of brainy people with very expectant faces. Okay? Firstly, are you equipped with headsets? Please make sure you are, because there is interpretation. English, channel 1, Dutch, channel 2, French on channel 3. So, of course, you can listen and you can ask questions or make comments in those languages. Secondly, critically, are all phones on silent? Please make sure they are. Double check. Don't need to switch them off, as if you could. In fact, who could? Who could, for the next 3 hours, switch their phone off? You really could, sir? Yeah? You're not sure there. Oh, buff. Huh? Okay, well, you can leave them on, but here's the deal. If you do, there is really no excuse not to send out at least one from each of you, one constructive, enlightening, provocative comment to the wider community. I can tell you that with the speakers that we have got here in the next 3 hours, you will have some juicy quotes to put out there, if nothing else. We'll also be taking questions from Twitter. A few things might come in on the wall behind me, and so I will keep an eye on that. First question to you, good people. Who knows what the Together project is? Okay, the gentleman who didn't know whether he should switch his phone off or not. Yes, what is it in a nutshell?
Interacting with European citizens?
Yes, good. Can anyone be more precise in that interaction? When did it start? Ooh, okay, so it was launched in 2016 by the group in cooperation with its entire progressive family, exactly to engage citizens across Europe in very, very key debates about some of the really big issues affecting their daily lives. Now, this particular event is a very important stage in this 18-month journey. It's shaping a whole new direction for Europe. And it began, as I said, last year, and then it kind of comes full circle back to the capital of Europe in tandem with the European Parliament elections. So there is a whole strategy behind it. And the purpose of the journey is indeed to reach out to as many like-minded and, of course, not like-minded, because there isn't really any point in simply speaking into an echo chamber, so also the non-like-minded, all across the EU, and to engage them in standing up for their future. Outreach is different. We've got events like this one. We've got all sorts of debates happening online in a curated online space. In fact, I was reading some of those comments. Put your hand up if you have made a comment online in the last, I don't know, week or so. Who's contributed some of their thoughts? Because there were some really good ones. Just you, sir? No wonder you're a Together ambassador. Look, that makes sense. So we've got some really good debates going online, some really pertinent stuff and useful stuff, and I'm going to refer to it later that's been said. So our event will be conducted in exactly that same spirit of exchange and listening, but we have a view to creating some tangible outcomes off the back of it, because we're going to draw together comments that are going to be adopted in a statement at the end, comments that have come from all sorts of partners. So the statement that comes out of this Bruges event is going to be added online to all the other Together statements and will nourish the political family going forward and then enable them to offer concrete proposals to the wider public. Okay? Nearly there. Let me just tell you what's on the agenda tonight. We've got an address. We've got several addresses and keynote speeches. Then we've got 2 whistle-stop panel debates. Okay? We've got the adoption of the statement, and we've got a nice closing address. All right? I have just one request as your moderator. My job is to navigate you through the next 3 hours and get you out of here to dinner by 7:30. Okay? It's also to facilitate a really wide-ranging debate and to enable as many voices as possible to be heard. So I'm quoting the Greek Stoic philosopher here, Epictetus. We have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so we can listen twice as much as we speak. All right? So that is what I'm asking you today, please. I know that you are all super bright individuals who are super passionate about what you do and really into your subject. But the genius is in condensing that into some headline messages. So I ask you, with your big brains, kindly formulate any question or comment that you have before it leaves your mouth. And the same goes to our poor speakers who I've literally terrorised into being... In fact, one of them was sitting scribbling in the front row going, I'm already reducing it to under 3 minutes, all right? So brevity is the order of the day for everybody. So I thank you most heartily for respecting that. One other very important thing, did you find these on your seats? Yeah? The table tennis bats. Okay, so there are 2, very obvious. We're going to take a few votes as we go along. And you know what? If you think something is particularly important to vote on in this room and I miss it because I'm thinking of other stuff, raise your hand and say, Kat, can we take a vote on that? And then if we want to take a vote on it, we will. So it's pretty obvious. Green for, and red for, and nothing in between. All right. And on that note, please can you join me in giving a very, very warm welcome to Kathleen van Bremt, who is Vice President of the S&D Group. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Katrina. It's always very difficult to make the introductions after you made all the introductions. But let me start by saying that I'm to welcome you here in Bruges, but I'm also extremely proud to welcome you here in this very important historical city of Bruges, and a very important European, how do you say that, sort of university where a lot of people start their first steps into the European project. And as Katrina already mentioned, the Together events of the SND is a series of events where we connect with people all over the European Union. So we do that in a lot of the member states and a lot of the cities. And last November we had a Together event in Antwerp. And Katrina mentioned the mayor of Ghent. He being here in time, coming from Brussels. But he remembers when he should have been in Antwerp, he was an hour and a half late. So it's easier to come from Brussels to Bruges than from Ghent to Antwerp. Keep that in mind if you take your car in this wonderful country. Let me just outline a few questions before we enter into the real debate of today. And I think last couple of years in Europe, we faced a lot of crises. We all remember the financial crisis. We remember, and we're still in the middle, let's say, of a migration crisis. But on top of that, we are facing a crisis of what we could call the crisis of democracy, or questions about democracy, and in particular, the questions about European democracy. Is it still working? If you look to rising populism, of course the Brexit, if you look to the many questions, the problems that we're facing in some of our member states, think of Poland, think of Hungary, but some people say it's much more than that. The crisis of democracy relates to the problems that we face with globalization, the problems that we face with terrorism. So it's a very wide subject to think about. And the question is then, how do we deal with that, socialists and democrats? How do we look at these problems of our democracy? And you saw it already in the film. Is it a good idea to think, for instance, about a trans-European list? We've discussed that in the European Parliament, the last Strasbourg session. We even had a vote on that. Will it save European democracy if we have a European list? I'm quite sure that Joe Lyman will get into that subject because I know he's very, very much an advocate of that. Will it improve? Will it save? Different questions. Our European democracy, will it improve if a Dane can vote for a Greek? If an Irish citizen can vote for a German, for instance? Would that increase European democracy? Good question. The same about the Spitzenkandidat, and I'm looking to Sergei, he's one of the advocates of the Spitzenkandidat. We were the first group to say that is important, we want to go for the Spitzenkandidat, and we will have, again, a procedure on that. Will that improve European democracy? Question mark. Quite frankly, I think that are really important debates, but at the same time, I'm quite convinced that it will not save our European democracy, and it will not be the one and only way to look at the problems that we're facing. I think what we really need, especially as socialists and democrats, being together with others, let's be fair on these issues, but together with others, we are the founding fathers of the European Union project. And facing a lot of difficulties in a lot of our member states, I think it is extremely important that we redefine our values in the face of the new challenges. We've always been the political group that stands side by side with people that have to fight in life, that are facing a lot of risks. And these risks in life are changing. And tackling these problems is, yes, we can improve our democracies. Oh, and I almost forgot. Yes, we need to change the way Europe works when it comes to working with the Council. Do you remember? Do you see how our heads of delegations, heads of states in our different member states act when it comes to European policies? I all invite you to look, the months to come, to look into the political debate in the member states when it comes to the multi-financial framework. Please look into that. How will our people, also in our own party, how will they act? Will they choose only for their own budget, their own money, and say Europe needs to solve your problems, but at the same time we are not prepared to make sure that the budgets are in place? Please, I invite you to look at that debate. So what I think is you absolutely need, and that is the discussion of today, you absolutely need methods, new ways of thinking to improve our democracies, to involve the public widespread in decision-making process. And that means that we also need to question our own functioning in the where we work, in the European Parliament, in Council, national level. How do we work and how do we actually make sure that we're transparent in what we do? I tackled a few of the issues that I think will come up in the afternoon today. And I'm all inviting you here today in Bruges at the European Institute to think with us. And I'm looking especially, and a lot of you are here, to the young people, to the students or the ones that are in a traineeship for the very first time. I'm quite convinced that the future of Europe and the future political leaders of Europe are maybe here in the room. And that is what the Together event is all about, to make sure that we can think, invent, and make sure that we make new solutions work together. And I'm very proud that I'm not the only one to welcome you here in this wonderful city of Bruges. I said it when we made the preparations. I've been at different levels. I've been European politician, but I've also been a national politician. And when you run for national political level, whether it's the federal or the Flemish, you know, Belgium is quite... Not strange, Joe. It's a complicated country, yeah. It's a complicated country. If you can make it in Belgium, you can make it everywhere. But that's not what I wanted to say. Then Bruges and the west of Flanders, as we say, is not my constituency. If I go for European election, it is. And the whole of Flanders is my constituency. But the real owner of this constituency is, of course, the mayor of Bruges, whom you will meet tonight. He will be really very energetic because he's starting his local campaign. And he said that if he would have one vote less than the former election, he would not be mayor. So we all need your help tonight to make sure that he can win. But I'm not going to introduce to you Renate Landet. I'm going to introduce to you John Crombie. He's the chair. He's my actual boss. Well, it depends on how you look at it. But at least when it comes to national politics, he's my boss. He's the chair of the Flemish Socialists, the SPA, and he's, as many of the chairs of our national parties, not facing an easy task ahead of us. All are facing elections. We have local elections in October. We will face European and other elections next year. As in many countries, we are really struggling, but we're also battling. And that is what John does. He's absolutely the chair that is all around. He's preparing new socialism in Flanders, and it's his constituency here in Bruges. John, you have the floor.
Good afternoon, everybody, and I'm very happy to be able to spend a few minutes. If I understood the procedure very well, if you want me to stop speaking, you have to raise the red card, and then I won't. And very happy to have mayors of the cities present. Daniel Termond is actually the most popular mayor in Flanders. And I think it's important that they're here because if we talk about democracy and how to make that together, our cities are a place where knowledge is transferred. And when our party started, that was 135 years ago only. It was started because people wanted to change things, but didn't have the information and the knowledge to do it. And in the very first periods, then people started meeting each other to transfer knowledge and to make sure that they could improve the rights of everybody. They could improve the life situations of everybody. And then 135 years ago, most people didn't believe that they could. They didn't like politics because most of the people didn't have voting rights, and they didn't believe they could change something. It's perhaps very strange to say that you could look at today as a similar situation. A similar situation in the sense that everybody thinks that they have much more access to information, but they actually have much more possibility to hear and to see the same thing all over again. I think it's of the utmost importance that certainly young people are heading towards to be a critical mass, to be able to understand and interpret themselves what they see and what they hear. And social media is one of these things. It's not that they don't have access to information. There's lots of information, but people are pushing information to make people think in a certain way. And I think that's important, and that happens in our cities more than everywhere else. We have been fighting for an open access to education for everybody, and today, remarkably enough, we still have to fight for that. 135 years later, we still have to fight for democratic, a democratic way to educate people. And the big question in politics is why. Of course, we're struggling and fighting, but that's what we have done all the time. So that's not bizarre. But we have to ask ourselves the question time and time again, why? Why are we doing this? And why are we finding that coming together to talk about democracy and the impact of social media is so important, and the organization of Europe is so important? We do that because even today we are fighting for human rights. We're fighting in Europe for human rights more than 10 years ago. My personal opinion is that in the European Commission there should be a commissioner that does only that. Make sure that human rights are everywhere in Europe being kept as something that is very valuable. We should do that. But the thing is that today we are fighting for that. It should have been normal. We like to look at ourselves as the European Union as an area where we have very much evolved and we're modern and stuff like that, but human rights are an issue today, also in Belgium, also in Flanders. And the equality of men and women is an issue. So even after all these years, that's why, for the very essence of things, it's important that if we talk about the democratic organization, if we talk about the impact on social media, that's the reason why. Fighting for enough public investments to have good schools, to have public transport. You heard that we have difficulty of going from the one city to the other city in Belgium. That's true. The biggest problem is Antwerp, for several reasons. I saw that Sergei came by train. I very much applaud that. That's the way to do it. And you didn't have any problems, I suppose? Not from Brussels. But even that, even that, public transport. Are we able to convince people that having a sufficient amount of money to have public transport that is available and affordable for everybody is an issue today? Because privatization and not spending enough money is on the table again. So that's the reason why. And so I think that the most important thing remains after all this time, making sure that people get the possibility to have a proper education, have the possibility to become part of a critical mass. It's not because you hear something 100 times that it's true. It's not because lots of people are pushing a certain message that is the way to do it. And already that is important. And I'm sure that the panels today will tackle that. We need to talk a lot about that. How to organize ourselves democratically to make sure that people believe that they can change things. That's the issue. They want to vote, they're interested in their environments, but as 135 years ago, too many people are convinced that their vote doesn't matter. And we need to change that. Thank you for listening to me without raising the red card for a couple of minutes. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And so, without further ado, because he has already been mentioned, could you please give a very warm welcome to the President of the Party of European Socialists and co-chair of the Global Progressive Forum, Sergei Stanishev. Welcome.
Good afternoon, everybody, and it's really a pleasure to be here in Bruges. and in the College of Europe, which is one of the, I would say, symbols of Europe. Symbols of united Europe, of tolerance, modernity, democracy, many things which we really value, and sometimes, unfortunately, we take for granted, and they are not given for granted. Each achievement of the European Union has been, hardly won, and we have to stand and defend the achievements and go further, in my view. But in order to be interactive, I will start with replying to Kathleen, who expressed some skepticism about the Spitzenkandidat. Well, a question mark, of course. A question is always a doubt. And I have my doubts. But I would like to say, of course, there is no one silver bullet. Be it the transnational list or the Spitzenkandidat or any other individual measure which would improve European democracy to an extent that 90% of Europeans would go to vote to the European elections. We need a complex of political measures, institutional measures, and debates, as we have today, in order to show people, our citizens, that actually it makes sense to go and vote in the European elections. Because what is the reality in the last 30, 40 years? From the first elections for the European Parliament in 1979 until 2009, we had a permanent decrease of the turnout of citizens. In 2009, we had, I think, less than 43% of participation, which is a big problem for European democracy. And of course, the question is why? And how do people see European elections, and do they see any usefulness for them? So what do people compare? They compare, of course, to their experience in national elections. And in most democracies in Europe, we have parliamentary systems, where you elect a parliament, then the parliament elects the executive, the government, which is accountable to the parliament. This is not the case with European democracy, because actually European elections are limited in a way to electing members of the European Parliament who don't have the same extent of control, and selecting the European government, i.e. the European Commission, and controlling it in the same way as national parliaments do. And what the European elections are usually about? They're about two national issues, which means, do you like the government or you hate it? And you vote in favor of the government or you want to punish it. And really also there is another element in these European elections which is a problem from the point of view of European democracy. The perception of average European is that over there in Europe and Brussels, they're all the same. People, and we saw in the documentary, short documentary, they don't even know, most of them, that there are European political parties, that there are differences between the views about the future of Europe. The perception is that everything is decided behind the curtains as some kind of a compromise in political deals, and there is no real democracy and accountability at a European level. And let's be frank, the major problem comes from the European Council, because there things are happening really behind closed doors, unlike in the European Parliament, which is the only democratically elected European institution, and which is the most accountable because it is in permanent dialogue with the citizens. And I'll tell you a story coming to the issue of the importance of the common candidate and Spitzenkandidat, which is a personal story. I remember 2009. At that time, Poul Nyrup Rasmussen, a former Danish premier, was the leader of our political family, and I was the prime minister of my country. He came to me and said, would you support me to have this time a candidate for the President of the European Commission from the Socialist family? And I had to reply, how can I do it, Paul? Since already the most influential prime ministers from our family from the UK, Gordon Brown, from Spain, Zapatero, from Portugal, supported the current president of the Commission, Barroso, who was coming from the centre-right, from the EPP. And I felt ashamed that our socialist political family was not able to make a competition, to say we have a candidate who has a different vision about Europe at the midst of this financial crisis, which then became economic, social, and made so much damage to the image of Europe and to the perspective that Europe is creating something good for the citizens. And I think this all started with this situation. And back in 2009, it was our political family, the Socialists, who decided first from the political families that this time, for 2014, we shall have a socialist leading candidate who will be our candidate for the President of the European Commission. And it took some time, quite time actually, to prepare this process. And in 2014, we had the first political family in Europe to have our own Spitzenkandidat, Martin Schulz. And I can tell you, because I was part of his campaign, actually the party was backing his European campaign and European travel among all countries practically, that it mattered. We managed to organize meetings of our candidate practically in every country with all sorts of people, citizens, students, workers, small, medium-sized businesses, academia. He was all around. And I claim that this played a role for our outcome. Yes, we didn't win the elections, but we kept at that time the percentage and the number of our seats, 25% as it was in 2009, while at that time EPP lost 50 MEPs in their numbers. I also believe that the fact that following the socialist family, the other families, the EPP, the Greens, the Liberals, had their own Spitzenkandidat, played a role that for the first time since 1979 there was no further decrease in the participation in European elections. Because some people saw a chance that they can influence the process of selecting the President of the Commission. Although, I must say, it was not for granted, because it was, an experiment, a historical experiment, and many people, including in the Council, were saying, okay, this is a political game of the political parties. They will have their candidates, but in the end, it will be the European Council, which again will decide on the basis of power deal between the prime ministers and heads of state. Well, it didn't happen. And I think this was important because it was our family again who said immediately after the elections, although we are second, we insist this rule to be implemented by the Council. And we said it as a family very clearly, not only the group, the S&D group, not only the party, but our heads of state and government declared it before the Council was discussing this issue. And the opposition, which was coming from David Cameron, from Merkel to a high extent, in the Council couldn't resist it in the end. So I think this was something positive. And this is why I believe it is important to keep this system and to further develop it. Because in 2014, as I already mentioned, many people were skeptical that it would work at all. But then, since it worked, now I believe if the process is organized in a transparent, active way, then it can strongly contribute to the interest of the citizens to participate in European elections, because they will see that actually their vote matters, that it's them who will decide in the end who will be the president of the European Commission. And I think that is a very strong incentive. By the way, it's a very timely debate which we are organizing here today, because tomorrow there will be a council. of the European Union, which will be discussing exactly these issues, and it's important to give a message also to the prime ministers, including our prime ministers, but also from the other political families. And I think that it is also important, and this is the position of our political family, to make steps further forward, because what has been done was not enough. We need to mobilize more people and to give ownership of the citizens, and including the progressive people, left-thinking people within our family in the process of selecting our candidate. Because again, going back to 2014, in reality there were not too many people willing to participate in this exercise because it was not secure. Many people didn't believe that it will actually work. Now the interest, I believe, will be higher. And here we as progressives have to lead again, as we did in 2009 and 2014. And this is why I'm very happy that for this year, in December 2017, our Council in Lisbon had a very clear roadmap of the PES for the common candidate procedure. I will just mention just a few things of this. First, and this is important to remember, also for our political family, we are aiming to build a coalition of progressive and pro-European forces in the newly elected parliament that would vote for the PS common candidate to be the next European Commission president. I think this also gives a clear indication that a parliamentary practice from national states should be introduced at the European level. So it's not only who comes first as a candidate and political party to the European elections, but which political family is able in the European Parliament to mobilize a coalition supporting the candidate. I think it gives a better chance for the progressives in the next term if we organize ourselves well. Second, to elect a working group which will actually make this process. And what is especially important for me, and I strongly support this idea, in case that there are several candidates from our political family, to have a selection procedure of direct consultation among party members that can include internal primaries and possibility to hold open primaries. If that will happen, and I strongly hope so, that would be a new chapter, I would say, in European democracy. And I will be proud if our family comes to the conclusions and organizes this process, because no one ever before has done such an exercise. A pan-European cross-border selection of a candidate, which will be a campaign before the campaign, actually. This can give visibility to different candidates from our political family, which could share their ideas with the members of our political family, which can compete if you wish, and which will have their input on the common manifesto of the socialist political family. I think these are all very important and positive things, because after all, our family has always fought for more rights to the people, more influence to every citizen in the outcome of the political process. And I believe that if we hold this initiative as progressives, then many more progressive people, left-thinking people, social democrats would come and vote, because they may see then that actually their vote matters, that it's not a behind-the-closed-door deal, that it's not a power game, it's about democracy. And this is how we can actually change the perception of European democracy, which is now, in the eyes of people, on decline, effectively. And unfortunately also the prime ministers very often contribute to this, because usually what is the mode of behavior? Every prime minister is going to the council and coming back from the European Council is not saying what kind of European decisions they undertook on climate change, sustainability, youth guarantee, whatever, any subject which affects every country. But each one is saying, I fought and I received this and that. And I didn't let something to happen to our country. So they are seeing and presenting the European Union as something like a lion force far away from us, where we are defending national interests. What I would like to see is really European leaders who are thinking about the common European future, who of course integrate the national interest, but let's be frank, every country in this global world, even Germany or France or Italy, which are the biggest ones in our union, they're far too small. Comparing to the United States or China, we can only survive and have better future, economic, social, political and cultural for all of us if we stay together. And this is why I believe it is extremely important to show that there are different visions about Europe, that these political families is not just, a bureaucratic European exercise, that in the European Parliament, the Socialists are fighting with the EPP on a number of issues, that we defend our values and our policies. And although we have a quarter of the European Parliament, very often we succeed on the sustainable development goals, initiatives, on the social pillar, which was adopted by the European Parliament with our initiative and with our negotiating skills to achieve this. And what we need is to turn it into reality. So coming back to what was said, and there's a question mark, will the Spitzenkandidat really change everything dramatically? Probably not, but it will be a big step forward, and it depends what kind of substance we give to this process, how open, transparent and dynamic we are making, because, and I will probably stop with this, I hear now, today we have a new star at the European horizon. It's the President of France, Macron, who says, I want cross-European consultations with the citizens, which is very good, but it's not a novelty, frankly speaking. We are doing here today exactly the same thing, and the Socialists are doing it for years. But there is a contradiction. He says, I want a transnational list. I'm personally in favor of a transnational list because it can show that at the European level, again, there is difference between the Liberals, the Greens, the Socialists and the EPP. And each family can promote its own agenda. But it's strange that he is against the common candidate. There is an internal contradiction in this stuff, and we should speak about it openly. So finally, I want to see the Socialist family in this forthcoming election leading the change, democratizing the process, giving ownership to the citizens much more than before, and standing for this idea then in the European Parliament and in the process of selection of the heads of the European government, the European Commission. We need to make this fight, and then I believe we can have even better chances than we do have today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the three of you for your eloquence and setting the scene so broadly, and also thank you for going into detail there about the Spitzenkandidat, and this is a feature of our debate. It's not the sole feature of our debate, and in fact I pick out both the explanation there and the value that Sergei sees in it. The question, perhaps not a doubt, but I think what Kathleen raises, is that all there is? And I think you make a very good point there, and that's also the purpose of us coming here together to specify. The content of this first debate is not just technical, whether transnational lists or Spitzenkandidaten is the way to go, and there is a debate tomorrow. It's bigger than that. It's also what is that democratic process and how do we reach people, and what is Europe for? Now, as somebody who ran campaigns for 10 years for the European Commission in all sorts of topics and policy areas, and who knows how to reduce all of that policy to what does it mean to you in your daily life, that's also the big challenge. If you want to get people out to vote, they've got to know what they're voting for, and they have to know what the added value of Europe is. And that's absolutely critical. And I think that's also where, as Sergei said, member states aren't helping enough. And that's the challenge. They go back, they negotiate, and they say, look what I kept for us. And of course, the rhetoric is wrong from the start. Interestingly, one more thing I'd like to just pull out for the second debate on social media, if I may. I saw a question coming through here on Twitter. What's in it for the older people of Europe? And it's an interesting one to think about, particularly when we think about reaching out and reaching out through social media and who we are reaching out to. And if we think of that very salutary lesson of the referendum in the UK and the people who voted against, well, the older generation, we also need to speak to them. So that's very, very, very key. All right, so we're coming to the first debate, improving the democratic process in the EP elections. We've got 4 panellists. It's very exciting. First, may I please invite to join me, it doesn't matter where you sit, Margaritas Schinas, who is Chief Spokesperson of the European Commission. Thank you very much. A warm welcome. Daniel Termont, who is the Mayor of Ghent, please, welcome to you. Adriana Cerretelli, very, very well-known journalist, and of course Joe Leinen, MEP and co-author of the report on the European electoral law. So welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Just out of interest, because I want to use these, and before these good people sit, and because you gave such an eloquent speech on the Spitzenkandidaten 2014 and moving forwards, as they sit, should we take a little vote at the outset on that, where we stand on that? Okay? So even though we know there is support for it, let's take a vote in the room anyway. Who is thinking, yes, I feel very positive about it, and it's also a sort of a starting point for something broader, as you said, we can evolve. Who's feeling very, very positive? Very, very positive, but not so positive there with the red? You're feeling very positive? I thought that was a kind of a cunning there. Okay, who is really waiting to be a bit convinced, not quite sure? Both sides of the fence? You are, both sides of the fence. So you could have done that, couldn't you? So you're there. Okay, all right. So we'll have a think afterwards. So, ladies and gentlemen, kindly set a good example for the assembled company by delivering your opening statements in 3 minutes. I've got this to wave if you need to shut down. Shall I start with you, Margaritas, please? That might be a nice start. Perhaps you could just very briefly talk about the EC's plans, particularly in the process that we've heard about. Thank you.
First of all, thank you for having me. Let's go straight to the meat. There is one fundamental basic question, the sort of a big elephant in the room, is why do people go to vote for the European elections? That's the question. The obvious answer is to elect their MEPs, their representatives to the European Parliament. Well, I'm sorry to break the news, but this answer is no longer good enough. We need to go beyond that. We feel that we need to give voters the possibility to attribute praise or blame on what is good or wrong about Europe today. And this goes far beyond than sending an MEP from your constituency to Strasbourg. We had a good start, but a timid start in 2014, where this embryonic Spitzenkandidat process brought Juncker to the Berlaymont and gave me a good job as well, by the way. But this is not enough. This was the start, but in 2019 this is no longer enough. Why? Well, first of all, because we have a much more complex EU that is coming out of the poly-crisis, that has to prove that we managed to resist the catastrophologists and the Cassandras and the doomsayers that were predicting that everything will go up in flames, that Greece will go out of the euro, that the migration policy would be a disaster, all this that didn't materialize yet. Now we have to give people a stake again in 2019, doing what I would call a Spitzenkandidat plus option. And this is, by the way, the menu of the leaders tomorrow. So there is no better moment to discuss these issues than the day before with people like you in Bruges. I'm delighted to be here for that. So it's much more stimulating, if I may say so. So what is this Spitzenkandidat Plus would entail? We put forward a communication in the Commission last Wednesday. I think you have seen it. There we say that we need to maintain the Spitzenkandidat process, but at the same time, this time, we have to make clear that, and this is probably a way to overcome the doubters of the system, that there is no automaticity embedded in the Spitzenkandidat system. Let me put it differently. Last time that Jean-Claude Juncker was a candidate in Luxembourg, he won the election. He was a Spitzenkandidat for his party, but he lost the government because being a Spitzenkandidat is not enough to get you the job of the executive. This is what we need to do in Europe this time. This is how you overcome the doubters. You build in a Spitzenkandidat process that applies. You put forward in a democratic way as political families your guy or your girl for the top job, and then you invest him with a double legitimacy from the European Parliament and from the European Council. So there is a way to combine Spitzenkandidat without leading into automaticity that scares some of the leaders that will be discussing this issue tomorrow.
I need to ask you to... thank you.
Stop here.
You are a star. Okay. So no automacy, there's a double legitimacy, so it needs to be a Spitzenkandidaten plus. Okay. Park those thoughts for a moment. I'm going to turn next to Daniel, please. Now, I didn't sort of really talk to you about what I'd say to you, but if I may actually, and then you can ignore me if you want to, when we were together this morning in the hemicycle, we were talking about the value of cities and mayors because they're so close to citizens. And I actually noted down a fabulous quote of yours. I think you said that it was very important. We were talking about innovation, particularly in climate change, adaptation and mitigation. And you were saying, you know, we need to get all of those sort of complex, innovative technologies at household level conversation. So, in all of this, in this democratic process, in making citizens feel there's a point to voting, what can cities do who are closer?
I'm going to try to explain it to you in 3 minutes. And I cannot ignore you, of course, definitely not. First of all, I want to say that I'm very glad to discuss here not only about the future of Europe, but with the future of Europe. A lot of youngsters, and that's very good. I think that we must do more than this. But I came on this point, I came back on this point. First of all, I want to say that I think that a lot of responsible people in Europe, and politicals and administration, are thinking too much about structures, thinking too much about positions, are thinking too much about what has been Europe, and we have to go further as Europe as it is today. I'm so convinced that if we want to win the hearts of the people in Europe, we have to rethink Europe. We have to take another way of doing policy in Europe. I am also convinced that Europe can learn a lot from the cities. Some of you will know that I'm also the president of Eurocities. That's an organization of about the 140 biggest cities in Europe. We represent about 140 million people in Europe. We are, and I think it was this morning the Commissioner Mudas who said, you are, as mayors, and the cities, those ones who are have to look daily in the eyes of the people. A lot of political responsibles, and on the federal government and in Europe, doesn't look anymore every day in the eyes of the people. And I think that's a little bit what they are losing now. They are losing the contact with the people in the street. I played so much that the Europeans will go back in the street, European responsible people go back in the street. You know, democracy is much more than a debate and words. The people expect something from Europe. That has been said here. If someone is asking what's in for me for Europe, we have to take this question very seriously. Don't laugh with this question. Don't say, "Oh, it's nothing. It's a conservative. It's a populist." It's all. No. Everybody is asking, "What's in for me in Europe? Why should I go voting in Europe?" Here we are obliged to go voting here in Belgium, so that's no problem. We are obliged. We don't have to fight to convince them to go vote. They are obliged here to go. That's a very good system. So we can work then on the program and on the candidates that we have. So if it was Spitzenkandidaten or not, but we have candidates. But the only thing I want to say is Europe can learn a lot from the cities because you have to work together with the citizens. You know, when I was elected in November 2016 as president of Eurocities, I proposed immediately to set up a campaign for democracy. A campaign that was called Europe for Cities, Citizens for Europe. What I want to do is having the 140 big cities in Europe, that they all organize something like this around Europe, and that they ask the opinion of the people, and that we bring all these ideas together, and we have in Edinburgh, I'm going to say Edinburgh, it's symbolic of course that we are going to Edinburgh this year for our assembly, General Assembly, and I hope that we can get there in November all the ideas together so that we are prepared also for the elections of 19. And as a matter of fact, one of the things that we're going to do in Ghent, for instance, is we're going to ask to every Ghentian, give us your ideas about the future of Europe. And this one, the lady or the man who has given the best idea, will be our Ghent president for Europe. And that will be, that's a big campaign where we try to involve every Ghentian. And if every city is doing something like this, you can even everybody going to think, should I take part to that competition or not? That's already something that he thinks about Europe. And we're going to try to do it. We have a lot of examples. My 3 minutes.
Way over, but don't worry. I'm giving some largeur because you are so interesting and because this lady needs more time, and then it's balanced. But
thank you very much. What do you want to drink?
Well, but I
is there champagne here instead of water?
But I will stop you there just because that's very interesting and a high note on what you're going to do. And I think sort of people's faces lit up there with the idea of, oh, anyone can become so. It's a bit like the gentleman this morning, the mayor, saying they had in preschool, there was the possibility for people in preschool to become mayor for the day. And I just thought that was absolutely fabulous. And I wish I'd had that. So that's interesting. And you're absolutely right. It's more than debate and words. Not what's in it for me, as in what's in it for me or I won't vote, but really what is that fabulousness of the EU added dimension. So thank you very much to both of you. I now turn to my lady on the panel. I'm giving you 4 minutes because they took more time. So now you can expand back out. You've gone like this, and now you can go like this. So Adriana Cerretelli, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you to all. My voice, I don't think, will be the same of the others. I think that at the moment the European democracy is more than necessary, but at the moment it does not exist at all. And if we take the election of the European Parliament, they have already said this, they are the product of 27 national elections with 27 national debate, problems, ambition, and so on. The problem is how to get out of this situation. And this is not easy. One possibility is the Spitzenkandidaten. It's a beginning. But I think that the President of the Commission was very pragmatic, as usual, when he proposed the Spitzenkandidaten Plus, because he perfectly knows that the government would be against the system unless you had a double legitimacy of the President of the Commission, and this is a very good idea. But I think that one of the problems is the Parliament. I was in Strasbourg at the last session, and I think that the Parliament took very negative decision when they voted against the transnational list, and in favor of the Spitzenkandidaten, in the sense that this is a democratic contradiction that I don't think is a good message to send to people from a parliament that pretended to be European, but in fact it is not really European. So this is one thing. The second one is we don't have transnational lists. We hope to have them in the following election in 2024. In the meantime, we have Macron insisting on this idea of consulting people, citizens, just to ask them what they do want. And this is very positive in my way. It is what we are doing in some way. But the problem is still, how are we doing this consultation? Apparently, we are doing them in a national way, because today we have only this national dimension in Europe. And this is a paradox, because in Europe we have the euro, the internal market, Schengen, Erasmus, a lot of things, very peace, a lot of positive things. But at the same time, the paradox is that even if all this can justify the existence of a European democracy, in fact, this democracy does not exist. Why? In my view, because we don't have, not yet, a European culture, a European narrative of the events. Even if we think of very recent problem as the financial crisis, the Greek crisis, if you talk to people, a German has a narrative, an Italian has another one, the Greek or the Dutch. Each narrative is national. And so you don't have a culture, you don't have an identity, because yes, we are European, but before we are Italian, Greek, German, and so on. We don't have really a great mutual trust. After the crisis, we lost a lot of confidence in each other.
Adriana, may I ask you to roll up? No,
yes,
you're okay. No,
So,
yeah, go on.
So the problem is, what are we doing? I think that in some way the debate that we are doing is premature, but this is a beginning, and this is very important, just to hope to be able to change in the future our Europe that we need.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. I think you make some very, very valid and interesting points there, and this issue about we don't have a European culture or narrative. That'd be interesting. Maybe we can, let's take a quick vote on that, and maybe again it's a bit obvious considering the majority of you are studying here, but let's just have a thought. Who feels both European and their own nationality on a level, and who feels national, their own nationality first and then European? So for whom is it, I'm a European and I'm a Brit, I'm a European and I'm French? Where is it a level playing field? Where is it both for you? Okay, the Reds are hilarious. And where is it actually? It's I'm Swedish first and then I'm European. Okay, I'm mixing up the colours. I'm not being very clear. Okay, interesting. What nationality are you? You're Belgian, and you feel Belgian first.
I think it's more Russian. You have the choice, and there's now we are debate how to put people and Europe Martin with every time we go to debates, everyone sit down in front, me and the people, and I think it's
We'll try. We're just doing some opening statements, and I'm being pretty good with my stopwatch, and I promise I'll do my best.
to work from to down.
Yes, or just make the integration better. I mean, I would hazard a guess if we didn't have any top, but we must debate.
You can't put
En français? No, you're Flemish.
Nee, een Europese identiteit, je kan dat niet verplichten aan de mensen. Dat is iets die geleidelijk aan groeit.
Okay, I didn't have my headset on. Can you translate for me, please?
Yeah.
You cannot, absolutely, absolutely. You are absolutely correct. Yes, thank you. Can I park your very, very valid comment there, if I may? Thank you. No, you can't, because it's it comes here, so it can't be forced. I'll come back to you, I promise. Thank you. Let me just come to Joe first, if I may, and I'm holding that thought because it's a very valuable one. Thank you, Joe. Could you just literally 3 or 4 minutes, what have you heard? What would you like to add to what you've heard? Thank you.
Yeah, responding to the lady, the European Union is not the Soviet Union. That's the big difference. We are the first time in history to unite the states and people on a voluntary basis, and that is the value that we have in the EU, and of course we have to connect and reconnect with the citizens again and again, and we are just trying to find out what are the best ideas, what are the best instruments to close the gap between the citizens wherever they live in the European Union and of course the representatives they have elected or the institutions that are working for them. That's the big challenge. And I'm proud of my political family, Sergei, that we have been the first one to open the Spitzenkandidaten model. And in fact, when you elect at home a city mayor or a country chancellor or president, you want to know these people before the elections. You don't want to know them after the elections. And it is so normal that on the European level we have to know the personalities and their ideas before the European elections and not afterwards. And the Parliament made it quite clear we are not going to elect anybody in 2019 who has not made campaign in the European elections. That's pretty clear by a very large majority, and I would not advise the European Council tomorrow to go into a power game with the European Parliament on this question. They have lost in 2014, they will lose again in 2019. Second, I'm really proud, Sergei, what you opened today, that we make the next step. And I hope we could have more than one candidate, because democracy lives from competition as well. And I hope that we have a good personalities that dare to be candidates, and that then really democracy would play. Going round with our candidates in the 27 member states and ask our members, and if we dare so, maybe in a later stage, our voters, what personality they want to have as the chef of the European government, the European executive. That is the next step. And of course, the European lists are the missing links between the European political parties that we have and the Spitzenkandidat we have, because the Spitzenkandidat cannot be voted by the citizens in all member states, so there is a logic that is lacking. And it is a shame for the Conservatives in the European Parliament to vote against, when 20 years ago they voted in favor. And behind closed doors, high-ranking Conservatives told me why they voted against. They are afraid of Emmanuel Macron. They are afraid that there is Europe en Marche, a European list by Macron, and that he goes essentially in their voter clientele. And such a short-sighted tactical move is just a shame for my colleagues in the Parliament, because the European list is a strategic point to create a transnational political debate, to have an European public space. And Kathleen, I would say it is even an attraction to the citizens, if they get a list where they see a Greek, where they see an Irish, where they see a Polish, and they would ask questions, they say, I vote for Europe. And at the end, of course, they would vote for the political parties because potentially they are not knowing all of the candidates, as unfortunately they are not all knowing their national candidates, I must say, because our constituencies are so big. So I think, Sergei, all of us in our political family, and that's my last word, socialists and Social Democrats, in their history, 135 years party here, 156 years in my country, they knew from the very beginning that social progress goes together with democratic progress. And we always have been for democracy because we knew involving the citizens at the end, you raise the standards, you don't lower them. And therefore, the trade unions, they are so much with us to look for more European democracy. And then I hope with an attractive program, we can win the citizens next year. And I would say we have to have attractive slogans. Europe without poverty, yeah, pollution-free Europe, and so on. Some slogans that are really high-ranking and get catchwords, not losing ourselves in details, and then I think we can come out even stronger. That's my pretty wish. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I think we've had some very clear points there. You talked about, for you, the Spitzenkandidaten in these transnational lists very much go hand in hand. You made the comment, democracy lives from competition. That's a nice quote. We don't have a European culture, you say. We don't have a European narrative. We need the double legitimacy there in the Spitzenkandidaten. We need the Council, we need the European Parliament, and then don't forget the value of the cities and how close they are to the citizen. So those are the top lines. The lady called for interventions from the floor. Before I call upon you and try and see if anything comes in round there, there are 3 students in the house. Where are the 3 students? Carolina, Francesca, Lorena. You're here. So, oh, very delicate. So you can see, I'm mistress of the clock, you can do a better job than them. Keep it nice and short, although they were very erudite. So who is Carolina? You're Carolina. So I would love to hear from you. What have you heard, or what are your thoughts on this big issue about democratic participation? How old are you, by the way? 25. Okay, wonderful. Goodie.
Okay, thank you very much once again, Europe Together, for organizing this event and letting us speak up today. Okay, so Abraham Lincoln said that the government is of the people, by the people, and for the people. Now, do we have in Europe a parliament that is literally led by the people? And if so, which people? Because in the EP elections, the candidates ask for their national constituents' vote, and not of all the European people's vote. So the recent proposal on transnational list called by Macron failed, unfortunately. This is a setback to the chance of reviving the participation in the EP. Also, when people from Spain, Poland or Romania are taking up the streets, there is no Juncker, no Tajani, no Tusk speaking up and addressing those people. Why is that? Well, because it would be called a national interference. And in consequence, we have a union that we dearly love, but is tied severely by the national governments and parliaments. This being said, then why shall we be surprised that Slovakia, for instance, had a turnout of 13% in the last parliamentary elections? So there should be no surprise then in this regard. Because we have a chronic lack of European people's participation, which is the result of the narrow, national and self-interest objectives of all the member states. Now, as a set of solutions, I strongly believe that firstly we need more grassroots approach, initiatives that are close to the citizens and can raise the European people's problems, to talk about their key concerns and try to find efficient, long-term solutions. It is constant and close communication with the European people that can motivate the citizens to show up to the ballot box. Now, secondly, I strongly believe that all the political parties, political groups, from the European Parliament, they should have a campaign across all the member states in the European Union, all the 27 member states, and eventually organize a debate that is live streamed. Now, thirdly, the Spitzenkandidat process is a good start, as some speakers they have mentioned already, but it's simply not enough as a remedy to the democratic deficit. The political group groups should embrace a far bolder step, which was already mentioned by some, meaning holding primaries within each political groups. So in this case, the European people, they would see a real race for the top job at the Commission. And they would feel engaged. Also, there would be no closed-door negotiations. And fourthly, we cannot expect only the national leaders who quite often stick to their vested interests to come with a visionary plan for Europe. This is our generation's duty to push forward and ask our representatives to have the Europe we wish to have. Finally, the choice facing the European people ahead of 2019 is simple. Step in, interact, and bring Europe to the main fora. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Just to pick you up very quickly on one thing, you talked about something very concrete, which you said the parties, you said 27 member states, my heart dropped there. You're the first person I've heard actually say that so far. And you talked about a live stream debate. Just give me, and I mean very rapidly, you said a bit more close consultation with citizens. Okay, so apart from a live stream debate, what other two things would you say would constitute that close consultation?
Yes, for instance...
Very rapidly. Yeah, go on.
Sorry, for instance, there is the Pulse of Europe initiative.
Yes,
Europe
indeed.
Together,
Yep.
It's a good example of when you come across the cities in Europe and you talk about the key problems we have and how can you engage people into finding solutions.
Okay, so really get involved in a grassroots movement that's there and be a part of that.
Bottom-up approach, I would say.
Yeah, yes. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. You made some delightful, very pertinent points there. So, who do we have next? Francesca, please. Welcome, Francesca. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for your remarks. I will be, as my colleague Karolina, a bit negative as well, since I have talked to my friends before participating in this event, friends from Poland, and I represent myself some civil initiatives and NGOs that work in Poland and in the European Union in order to foster this kind of identity that we hold dear here. And the most important part of my, let's call it research, is that people really don't care. They don't follow up on their candidates to the European Parliament. They don't follow up on the actions of the European Parliament. They even forget that they ever went to vote. So this confirms what we already seen in this short clip at the very beginning. So the key word here is indifference. And I would argue that even though we are talking about this European citizenship, in reality, we don't have one. We are stuck here in a way of a bubble, thinking that European citizenship works for everyone, but there are so many people who just don't see it for themselves. So the key component here is basically participation. See, I come from a country where the participation in European elections is at its lowest, and this is because we have been very proud of the freedom that we have received in the 1989. But instead of using this freedom for things like internalizing democratic values, we used it for economic benefit. And that's fine, because the situation in our country has been going up, and Poland is one of the examples of successful countries in the European Union. But in the end, the government has forgotten about something very important, and this is educating people and making sure that those grassroots initiatives, that civil activity is flourishing as much as the economy. And when it comes to democracy in general, and why I appreciate the efforts of transnationalists or Spitzenkandidaten, I still think that the internalization of the feeling of democracy cannot be a top-down approach. You cannot say in the European Parliament or the Council, the Commission, that from now on we should feel that Europe should be democratic. Because when I come back to Poland, I won't be able to explain to my friends who is Jean-Claude Juncker, how he got there, because they just are not aware. When it comes to transnationalists, unfortunately, it's also a different problem of people just really wanting to vote for their national representatives. Democracy is a very big problem in many countries in the East, and I think that the first step should be internalizing it. I'll follow up again on Karolina's words, working with grassroots initiatives, making sure that these people who are working there at the very bottom are being heard and that they are helping the democracy flourish. Thank you.
Thank you. You make a very interesting point, because I had a young woman, a real activist, really cool woman from Poland, a couple of times on some panels, and she sort of said, you've got to remember when you're not coming from somewhere like Poland, when you're coming, you're not coming from sort of the Eastern side, you're not coming with that history, you've got to remember that before we can even advance people to sort of talking about democracy, sometimes to half of them we have to explain what it is, which echoes what sort of, I'm not talking about everybody as in they don't understand the semantics, but I'm picking up on what you say about internalising also that and what it is. And I know you're saying something slightly different, but I think in order for us to have these conversations, we also need to allow people to unpack the standpoint from which they come. But you're absolutely right. Anything on internalising, which is what this lady also said, it can't be anything top down. But what do you think the best way is reaching people? Do you think it's like if you chatted in a bar with your mate, then you could make it, then you could distill it in a nutshell?
No, honestly, like there are already initiatives, and unfortunately, I'm very sad to see these. They're not coming from the progressive family, but in Poland, for example, they come rather from EPP.
Okay.
MEPs meeting with grassroots initiatives and trying to use their political capital, their political know-how to engage those grassroots initiatives in order for them to make their way either into politics or into education.
Or into education, yes.
This is something that I would really like to see more from like the entire side of the spectrum, rather than just coming from the biggest groups in the European Parliament.
Okay,
or the Commission.
all right. Okay, thank you. And I think you're not the first, and you echo, we've had it before about this issue about education and taking the debate really way back lower, because otherwise we're constantly trying to play catch-up. So, Lorena, where do we... Thank you very much, Lorena Weber. It is your turn. The floor is yours. You are in the spotlight. Thank you very much.
So thank you, Europe Together, for this opportunity to speak. Today I am a college student, but I also represent the Young European Federalists and our journal, The New Federalists. Concerning the need to improve the democratic process, I would like to focus my speech on the European political parties because, and as you saw in the video in the introduction, I am concerned with the lack of visibility of the European political parties. The MEPs are elected to the direct universal suffrage, and the European parties are meant to be essential actors of European democracy. And they should contribute to bring the EU closer to its citizens by directly representing their votes and their will. However, as you saw in the introductory video again, these European political parties are misread or unknown by the European citizens, as well as their link with national parties. And from my perspective, this causes a real problem for the democratic process in the elections, because as citizens are often not aware of the impact that has their vote on the size of a European political party, well, they are also not aware that their vote determine policies that will affect their daily lives. So in 2015, the European Parliament adopted a resolution addressing these issues, following the report on the electoral law written by one of our speakers, MEP Jo Leinen. And one key proposal of this report is the enhancement of these European political parties. And for example, the report proposes that ballot papers used in the European elections should give equal visibility to the European parties and to the national parties. And I know this may sound really anecdotal, but it is actually not, because currently the citizens are not aware of the affiliation to a national party, to a European party. And to go further, in some member states, it is even prohibited to mention in a ballot paper the affiliation of the national party to the European party. And I consider this causes a real harm for the fundamental right of the European citizens to be informed, and so it harms as well the democratic process and their democratic participation. And this is part of a bigger issue of European elections, which are conducted through national dimensions and governed by national parties and sometimes by national political calculations. So how could a genuine European political process could emerge in these conditions? Mr. Leinen, you are the co-author of the report on the electoral law. For such reform to be adopted, unanimity is required at the Council, and currently this institution appears as a blocking institution. So I would like to ask you, what is the current state of play, and do you think that a reform should be effective for the 2015 and 19 European elections?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so thank you. Before I hear from them, very, very cogently, please, would you like to come back on that question, please, Joe?
Ask
more.
No, it's okay. I'm just like, I will ask more because you're going to be, I'd just like you to answer her question.
Yeah, tomorrow is the decisive day for your question, whether the European Council gives green light to reform the European elections. We have made 16 proposals. One is the one you mentioned, that the affiliation of national parties to the European families is visible on the ballot paper, and we said even on the campaign material and TV and media slots. And I think people would get used to then ask questions. My party belongs to this and this European political family. That would be a start. And to the previous, let's say, contributions, I think there is very much a chicken and egg problematic. One cannot say the citizens would not vote for European lists because we never tried. And my position is just the opposite. Let's try, and then you get a curiosity, you get an attractivity. They will be curious what it is. And the same is with the Spitzenkandidaten. I think that makes is career and its way. So let's not say the people are not interested when we never tried to ask them whether they like it or not.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. So I'm not going to turn back to the panel for now. We've got about 15 minutes. This side of the room has been a bit vocal. What about this side of the room? Anybody got a very concise question or comment? If there are questions, I can gather 2 or 3 for the panel. Anything on what you've heard? Yes, the gentleman here. So we'll hear from you, and then we'll hear from the lady here. So keep it nice and short, please. If you can get a mic to this with a very nice tie, go on. And please do say your name and where you're from.
Hi, my name is Ovidiu Anrațiu. I'm a student here at the College of Europe. I'm originally from Romania. I have a short comment, actually, following my fellow students. It has been already mentioned that people expect something from Europe. That democracy lived through competition and so forth. But we should address again the grassroots causes of the low voting turnout. I'm referring to the closed electoral lists, which are still a practice in some EU member states. And how is it possible that the list of candidates are made by a handful of people, normally party leaders? What is the ownership of the citizens in choosing for this? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Very clear. Okay, and yes, if we can get the mic to the lady here in the ochre cardigan. Thank you. And again, if you're a student, but also obviously where you come from too. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Isabella. I'm a student here at the College of Europe. I'm from Germany. And just recently we went on a study trip, and amongst the destinations we went to was the European Parliament in Strasbourg. And when I entered it, I actually realized that I'd never seen the European Parliament in any German TV show or in the newspaper. So what is your response to this? What do you say to people? Why is the European Parliament, why does it matter if not even the TVs or the newspapers show it? Thank you. Okay, one last comment or question. Doesn't have to be from the... Oh, it is. Okay. Okay, nice and concise, please. Thank you. Welcome.
Hi, I'm Nina Gill. I'm a British member of the European Parliament. And I just wanted to comment, really, that one of the challenges we face, coming from a country that's leaving the European Union, is that really people take the EU for granted, right? And many of the things that the European Union does offer for granted. And it's so evident in my country now that the interest in the European Union is at its highest. And many people just didn't appreciate what they were going to lose. And I think the challenge that we face is, I suppose, the responsibility we all have to take is we're not really getting out there and engaging people, the general public. We tend to speak in places like this where there's already a lot of engagement and a lot of interest in the European Union, and we need to figure this out. And what I liked about what's been said is that if we have Spitzenkandidat and we have transnational list, the lesson would be that you have to have what Sergei was talking about, primaries. People have to be engaged at local level, and not the kind of deal making that the EU behind closed doors has become famous famous for. That's what puts people off. And so there has to be a real commitment by all parties that it's going to be open and transparent process. Otherwise we will lose and the populists will gain and there will be a lot more misinformation.
Okay, thank you. So, I just to go back on there, because what really interests me is, we've got the visibility aspect that's come out, lack of visibility of the parties, lack of visibility of even the institution per se. We've had the transparency issue come up. We've had things going on behind closed doors. And then we've got, on the other hand, a sort of apart from the process and an understanding of a process and a distrust and a lack of knowledge of how it works, we've also got the sort of, what does it do? I can only feel European. What does it mean to be European? Because what's that added dimension for me in that? So can I come to you first, Marguerite? Would you like to come back on this question of visibility and transparency and trying to prevent this closed doors that the public perceives?
Yes, I think that very often when we discuss these issues that are surfacing now, this debate, we have a tendency to put the cart before the horse. We sort of go Brussels. We do Brussels speak. We do institutions speak. And I very much agree with the students that we have to take it from the other end. But if we take it from the other end, we're also coming to what you just said, that when we watch news at night, we switch to our national settings. We watch news in our own cultural and national context. We do not have a European public opinion yet. There is not such thing as a European demos. No, there is, but only 2 nights per year. The night of the Eurovision Song Contest and the night of the Champions League final. These are the only 2 nights per year where, regardless where you are, you sort of follow the same thing. The rest of it, we go national. So to go grassroots, go society, address shortcomings, see more of the European Parliament, we need a bit more emotion, a bit more grassroots, a bit more society. And listen carefully what I'm about to say, we need less Brussels. Although I speak for Brussels, I think that we need to de-Brusselize the European Union. The 2 strongest moments of EU communications in 2016 were during the Rio Olympics, an Italian fencing champion, she won the silver medal. And in a surprise move, she took out of her shirt a European flag and she wrapped herself on it. If Brussels were to organize this, the flag would have never arrived, someone would be on holidays, But this girl said everything about us.
Okay.
Second big example, the poor late Jo Cox. 3 days before the Brexit referendum, she put her 2 children and husband in a Zodiac, and she was going up and down the Thames with a huge European flag. She got assassinated 3 days later, by the way. But this is what we need. This is how people sort of go into EU mood. It's not Brussels, it's not the midday briefing, it's not us, and we have all to put a hand to make it happen.
And you've led to a nice question, which I wanted to ask our journalist, but I'd like to come to Daniel first, please. You wanted to answer.
Very short. If you see indeed that the member states have lost their faith in the EU, how do you want that we convince the people in the EU to have faith in the EU? That's a big problem. That's the main problem of the EU. That is that the member states themselves and the federal governments lost their faith in the EU. And indeed, they speak about if everything go wrong, it's Brussels. Yeah, everything go wrong, it's all Brussels. But for the rest, it's us. And I have a proposal. Please note it.
Okay.
When post-Brexit, the 75 seats of the maps will disappear, use this money for European service policy participation, where you take 400 people who works all over Europe to engage a lot of people and have some stimulation in all the countries to have that grassroots initiatives, that then you have the civilization. And don't redivide the seats. Huh? Use the money for the people.
Thank you. He wasn't scribbling, he was noting here. Okay, just a quick, interesting that you also say that, because I do a lot of moderating for DG Com and for the Europe Direct information centres, and they've got this really difficult task of being on the ground and having anybody come into them at any point of the day saying, tell me about how to set up my barbershop in downtown Sofia, to what on earth is Juncker's investment plan, to, I need to know more about social Europe, and what about the youth guarantee? I need to help my kid. They've got that difficult, task there, and it's very, very difficult, all of those explanations. And I've totally lost the thread of what I'm going to say, so I'm not even going to say anything anymore, but I am going to ask you. It's about stories. It leads me on to that. It's about stories. We talked about visibility. We talked about integrating something so that you feel it. It has to come through pictures and narratives. You just talked about the sportswoman. You talked about the importance of image. So I say to you as a journalist who feel that there isn't a cultural narrative, there isn't this joint European narrative. What about the stories? Is the media helping? There is so much input, there is so much emphasis on the EU not doing enough to communicate. But what about member states? What about regional government? What about media? Where are they not helping to get out simple stories? What the EU does in the domain of fish, what does it do?
I can tell you an Italian story about journalism and Europe. When you propose, not so much in my newspaper, but in the other big daily, a story on Europe, they say immediately, oh, please, it's so boring. And then if we make a headline on Europe, we will not sell nothing. But this is true. This is not only an Italian story. This can be a French story, maybe a British story. I would say that the image of Europe among people is something boring, intrusive. People reject this Europe, and then there is this myth, in my view, of the Euro bureaucracy. Yes, the Euro bureaucracy exists, but the Euro bureaucracy is applying the decision of the government. And to me, Europe is more intergovernmental than Brussels in some way, because I think that the problem is the perception and the communication. I think where Europe is not good is in communicating, but not because of the media, because they have a wrong communication. Okay. And then there is the perception. They are not selling well what they are doing in a positive way, and they leave that only the negative.
Okay, so can I park it? Yes, I'd like, yes. I'm going to stop you there because I definitely want to hear from the room. And Joe needs to. Keep it short, Joe, keep it short. I will come back to the room.
Very often when I am at the College of Commissioners with Directors General, with other people, I play a mental game. I time in my watch the moment where someone would say, this is a problem of communication.
Yes,
and it always comes 5 minutes, 10 minutes into a discussion. Always. Regardless of how good communication is or not, someone would say communication is not good enough. And you know why? Because if you say that this is a problem of communication, and you are a policymaker, then you automatically discharge yourself of responsibility and you give it to someone else. As the spokesperson to I don't know whom, as if there is a communications button that you can push and the skies will open and everybody will understand. I'm sorry to say, it's much more complicated than that. Policymakers have to assume communication themselves. They have to come out also on the rainy days, not only for the good stories. They have to be accountable to do crisis management, and this is not always happening. So I'm all for communication, but we also need, and let me be even more blunt now, we need the mayors to speak out for Europe. We need the businessmen to speak out for Europe. We need the farmers with the colossal subsidies to go out for Europe. We need the Erasmus generation to go out for Europe. I don't see many of the Erasmus generation speaking out for Europe.
Okay.
You know why? Because some of them are making money, but they are not discussing Europe as much as they should.
I think you make a very, very...
If I can answer, you are right on communication, but the problem of communication is the perception of the communication, and the result is negative. And that's a problem.
But,
okay, hang on a minute. He's coming in at the end there. Hang on, pipe down a second. Thank you.
The media, unfortunately, have this coordination cross bad news are good news, because that interests readers, and good news are bad news. And one could say that there are not so many news about Europe, is maybe as well that there are not so many bad news. Let's look at it like this, and then because they don't find bad news, they're going to be bureaucracy in Brussels. This is a repetition that doesn't get better in itself when it is always repeated. Okay, what I wanted to say, next year we have 40 years direct elections to the European Parliament, and it is high time that these elections are not second class but first class, and they are transparent and democratic from the very beginning. And my reform plan for the European election is exactly your point, that the candidates are elected in a democratic, open process, and not as it happens in the one or the other states by the party president or the party bureau. That the candidates list are at least 12 weeks before the election's done, and not 2 weeks before. How can you make an election campaign if you don't know that you are a candidate 2 weeks before the elections? So if that is not taken serious, then we continue to have second best elections, and the citizens, they smell and feel it. Say, okay, they don't take it serious, why should I go to vote? And then my last point, de-Brusselize the EU. I must say this is wishful thinking. In my speeches, I always say European unity doesn't come always by internal political will, but by enormous external political pressure. And take terrorism, take migration, take climate change, take unfair competition by China, take Trump's now dumping policies, take the insecurity we have in Europe and around Europe. It is an illusion that we get rid of the problem if we de-Brusselize. No, we have to fight for the common European good, for the added value if we share sovereignty together. And we have to be the guts and the trust to say it openly to the citizens. And then I'm sure, look on Eurobarometer, month by month, in all countries, even in Great Britain, you find a majority of people who want A, B, C, D, F, what the EU should do together. So I'm not so pessimistic as sometimes we do in such debates. Okay. I think the delivery of the EU is fantastic. Peace, freedom, wealth, big security. And I had one tweet before, Europe is the best place in the world to live. And we are fighting to make that life even better. And that is how the world sees Europe. We are a really sacred place, looking from outside.
Okay, I'm going to stop you because I need to give these people just a couple of last words. Is there any two last comments or questions that we can very rapidly take? This gentleman here, yes, I'll take you first because I've heard from... hold your thought a moment. Thank you. The gentleman... Is there a mic that can go over the other side? Could somebody jog around? You could already stand up. I think we'll hear you. But the interpreters may not. So, who are you already?
My name is Nathan. I'm an S&D trainer from the UK.
Hang on. Oh, have we got a... You've got a speedy mic coming. Right, here we go. Thank you. You're from the UK.
Hello there.
Hello.
We had a lecture at the Commission, I think it was last week, and I was struck by how little I knew in comparison to my fellow trainees about the institutions of the European Union, how they function, how they interact with one another. And they also remind me incessantly that the most Googled thing post-Brexit was, what is the EU? How does the EU function? I was wondering how you felt about some sort of pan-European education fund, because we've talked a lot about grassroots and how do we stimulate grassroots involvement in the EU, but that's very difficult. You can't. It has to be spontaneous. It has to be organic. Emotion can't be something top down. So some sort of like education fund to teach people how the EU functions, so they're not as susceptible to ignorance or fake news.
Thank you. And I'll just add to that, and I will put the question, it's going to have to be the last one, and I'll come if you have a last comment, just to say, I know from working again in comms for the Commission that there is an incredible, I mean, this is where I would disagree, there is an incredible amount of really good communication that comes out of Europe, actually. I mean, I've worked on it, so maybe I'm biased, but that really reduces it, that talks to stakeholders, that engages them before putting it out there, that's there. So, you know, there is a problem also with perceptions of uptake. You know, if we all come forward with negative in the first place, we ain't going to take it. But just to say for yours, there was a fabulous thing we did for Agri, very difficult, the CAP reform. Wonderful thing to go into schools, brilliant pack to go into schools. But the problem, as I understand it, but correct me if I'm wrong, is that the EU can't really stick its fingers in the educational systems of member states. It's not so. When you talk about a fund, perhaps you can elaborate very briefly on that. But it's a tricky area. Before you elaborate, did you have a last comment to make, or was it a question? A very nice and short one, please. Can we have a microphone here for this lady again?
Ik zal het in het Nederlands doen. Ik vind dat allemaal tof, via een democratie, naar Europese niveau en dinges. Maar ik denk vooral dat de parlementsleden nog enorm veel werk hebben op Europees niveau om effectief hun democratisch recht te kunnen oppakken. Dan hebben we 2 al die verdragen van Maastricht tot die multinationale vrijhandelsverdragen. Dat is in feite onrechtstreeks een Europese grondwet zonder democratische inspraak die op ons bord komt. Dus de juiste info vanuit Europa ontbreekt volledig. Bijvoorbeeld, er is een TISA-verdrag. Dat is verkoop van onze diensten aan multinationals. Er is daar niks over geweten. Waar kunnen wij alleen die... En zelfs de Europese parlementsleden hebben nauwelijks toegang tot die informatie, maar moeten dan wel in een week dat ratificeren en dan de lidstaten in een week ratificeren. Dus al die mooie sprookjes van democratie, ik denk dat Europa volledig moet hertekend worden.
Thank you. Whoa, and that's a big one to end on, but thank you. So you're saying, you know, God, where do we find the information? Where do MEPs find the information? They're the ones who have to debate on it. So I don't want you all to answer the same. If you would like to come back on this idea of, which I think is highly valuable, you know, if you want people to engage and you can't stick it on them, and there is a value to getting in there and talking about Europe earlier, but how do we do this in an educational setting? And also this talking about, you know, people being lost to find the information, even MEPs, on certain topics. So maybe, Joe, you can talk about the MEPs. Maybe, Margaritis, you could talk about sort of the education fund, and you two can say your final words in complement to that. So shall I start with you, Joe? Really nice and short, because we're at 5 to 6. Thank you.
Transparency is one of the mantras of this years, and we have a lot of developments in recent times. The Commission has done a lot. The Parliament just recently has decided a lot of transparent elements to be more open, and access to information, access to documents. And in the trade agreements, we really opened a new chapter. We opened a new page. The lesson by TTIP and by CETA was so important that now I think the documents are open. You can find them on the internet. The Parliament's intercommittee, they have access, they can read it. I know that out there are many people saying, no, you cannot, it is not, but it is not true. We have opened a new page, and transparency is now a guiding line in the EU, and I think we are even more transparent than many of our member states.
Okay, Joe, are you sticking around? Because I think that lady might want to have a conversation with you. Can I park it here for no other reason than time? But I'm sure he'll be here, and you may have a further conversation. That's the beauty of these kinds of events. May I come to you, please, Margaritas? Thank you.
I have two sets of remarks on this issue. First, on Europe's youth. I think Europe's youth know much more about the value of the European Union than we think they do. If you look, for an example, look at how the young Brits voted in the referendum. Why did this happen? It's not because we had some grandiose design or public opinion strategy to bring out the youth vote in the Brexit referendum. It's because they know because they travel, because they did Erasmus, because they live in a frontier-free Europe, because they go on holidays, that there is an added value of being European, something that you cannot construct with Brussels money or strategies or programs. And I hope that somewhere in Britain now there is a young Brit who is 20, 25 years old, and when he or she in 30 years will be Prime Minister, and the demographics will be right, this generation will reconsider the country's relationship with the European Union. I'm coming to the Erasmus project. 9 million Europeans, young Europeans so far. Juncker likes to add 1 million Erasmus babies too. This is the most successful grassroots project ever that we did to stimulate the sort of reaction that you are asking for. And stay tuned, because on the 2nd of May we will we'll put forward our proposals for the new multi-annual financial framework for the next 7 years budget. Don't be surprised if we propose to double or even triple the money that go to Erasmus. That's how you generate what we're talking about, a genuine feeling of mobility across borders. Final point, if I may, final point. Probably the moment also comes to consider a sort of an entitlement for Europe's youngsters. Something like that every European would be entitled to upon, say, becoming 18. There are ideas of pan-European railway ticket. There is the Solidarity Corps. There are ideas that we should create a stake for all Europeans, young Europeans, to visit, do voluntary work, travel. That's how we will do it. But we will certainly not do it by creating a common educational policy, because, as you rightly said, there is no treaty competence to have a common educational system in Europe.
Okay, thank you. Daniel, what have you heard? What are your closing thoughts, please?
My closing thoughts are that when Europe is prepared to work with its cities, and especially with the citizens, then we have a prosperous future for Europe, I think. And that can make a difference if the future of Europe can be another Europe than the Europe today, and can be something else than the United States, than China, and then the Soviet Union.
Thank you. And I know you've had to fight quite hard. I know you've got the EU urban agenda, but it's an ongoing to have that relationship, to be within that relationship with the EU and national government, isn't it?
And what's more, when I begin on this, I only get 1 minute. You give me 1 minute, so I cannot explain.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Well, you've been very kind, and thank you very much. Yes, please, to our journalists, if you could give short closing words.
I agree with what Margaritas just told. I think that the key to relaunch Europe is really transnational education, transnational culture. It is true, no common education system, but we have this problem of different narrative about our history, about our roots. And so we have, through this transnational education, trying to approach and to have a real new European humus that can restore mutual trust and also enthusiasm for Europe, because we lost the reason why we made Europe. We got peace, success, prosperity, and we take all this for granted, but they are not. So we have to educate the Europeans, starting from the babies. I completely agree. I completely agree. Otherwise,
the College of Europe is a nice place to start with the babies and the couples generation.
Thank you. I know they do feel
I know. I speak for experience.
The university is too late.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Okay. Yes. Well, thank you there. I think I'm just going to close, if I may, just close, because I was having, as I said, I was having a look at some of the comments that came in on Twitter and some of the comments online on the Together platform. And a gentleman, I think it was a gentleman, said, you know, we've got to think, and it echoes a little bit what Margarita said here about, you know, businesses have to talk, farmers have to talk, national government has to talk, media has to talk. You know, we live in such a general world of distrust at the moment that this enthusiasm to just maybe just take a risk and go, God damn it, Europe's a great place. Can we stop sort of criticising everything? And I think that this comment that came in on the Together platform is we need communicators too. So I think the MEPs who are busy do need to get out there more as much as they can. The mayors who are right there, right up against. The media needs to sometimes approach in a little bit of a different way. They are the bastions. They need to get behind to see what is truthful, but perhaps a little bit of list, and the communicators need to reduce the policy to the stories so people understand what Europe is for, so they will participate. So thank you very much. Thank you very much to you, ladies. Particularly, that was also one more thing. Who made point, Carolina, about it's perceived as EU interference? I think it's a very good point. I think there's a difficulty for us in seeing that the EU sometimes, we want them to be more powerful and interfere more. And that's a really tough one to get, that's a really tough one to solve. Can you give a very, very big round of applause to the 4 panellists who I beat into submission? Thank you. I'm very grateful to you all. Thank you. Thank you very much. So, just as a quick break, have your table tennis bats to the ready. Again, it's not a very difficult one, but you know, we had Brexit, everybody being alarmed. We spoke of it at the beginning. Oh, Europe will collapse. We need to communicate better. Who feels that going forward there is a spirit in which there can be an upswell, that we can communicate better, that people can grasp what Europe's for? Who's feeling quite enthusiastic about the European story and communicating it? Who's feeling quite enthusiastic about it? Going beyond this lovely little Brussels echo chamber. And who feels at the moment, God, I'm really wobbling about this crisis and I'm feeling a bit uncomfortable. I'm even studying Europe at the moment because I'm not sure it's going to survive. Who feels like that? Just you? You? You need to get together with the others. They need to buy you several large drinks and give you some cuddles. Okay. So, thank you. Can we crack on? Right. There is no rest for the wicked or the good. We are going to dive. Just a moment. We're going to dive. There's a little bit of a hubbub. Straight into our next debate. Participation in elections today, specifically the impact of social media. Shh. For those of you not doing interviews, I'd be most grateful if you can just be silent. We just got another hour and you're out of here into the fresh air and the nice food. So to stimulate your brain cells, can you please welcome 4 panellists? We've got Michel Chang, Professor, Department for Politics and Governance at the College of Europe. Obviously you're a big fan. We've got Clémence Mola, who is a student at the College of Europe. Coming up. Oh, I like that. You ran. Very good. May I welcome Yumi Renström, who is Mayor of the Municipality of Ovanika in Sweden. Welcome to you. And Maxim van der Kerkere, who is a student at Ghent University and a Together ambassador. Thank you very much for coming. Okay. I think it is very clear to you all why I have been called Hurricane Katrina in the past. So I think you know the drill. Can I turn first to Michelle, please? And I'd like to ask you, let's have a look a little bit in your first 3 minutes in the highs and lows of social media and how it can be a mechanism specifically for youth, but perhaps even further afield involvement. Because there was a tweet that came in, what about the older people? The floor is yours.
Okay, well, I think, first of all, that it's difficult to overstate the impact that social media can have, which we saw definitely in the last couple of large elections in Brexit, in the United States as well. And so we can definitely see that this has really changed the debate in terms of how people communicate and how people share ideas. This is why that we are incorporating this into the College of Europe's curriculum. And as our students in politics know, the Twitter exercise is a very important part of their education here at the college, because it is useful for the spread of ideas, to allow people to engage in debates, and also to mobilize and build alliances. When it comes to elections, it is often said that young people don't vote, and that it is older people that are more likely to get mobilized to go and defend their invested interests. And social media can help change that. We had a discussion in the last session about the effectiveness of official communication, and social media is a way for everyone to get into this debate and into the story. And effective social media influencers that are included in the communications gurus that we see in Brussels, but also people in this room, students at the College of Europe, can also influence people their age. They are very technologically savvy, and they are good at expressing the interests that people have in Europe, especially for their generation, and informing others of the importance of Europe and also how to get involved.
I'm scribbling. Okay, thank you. So you have absolutely put your finger on the multiplier effect, a kind of a digital multiplier effect. So we'll talk more about that. That leads very nicely to Clémence, because you actually have had some real kind of hearty experience. You're part of the campaign team in the French elections. So, you know, you can really, from your standpoint, what are some of the key points of your experience? What do you think the limits of social media are? What you think of the benefits? The floor is yours.
Yeah. So yes, thank you, the SND group, for inviting me. I did work in the communication team of Benoît Hamon in the presidential election in France, and I was also a candidate for the legislative elections in France as well. In terms of, and I'm the international secretary of the Young Socialists in France as well, and a student at the College of Europe. So in terms of the impact of social media, I'd like to say that my short but intensive experience on the issue leads me to think that it has little impact in terms of campaigning, meaning that the impact of fieldwork, which is just going door to door, asking people what they believe, presenting the programs and the candidate, has actually way more impact on people. If you look even at the Macron strategy in France, was definitely built first with En Marche, on just going door to door and of course communicating around it, but going door to door and asking people what they believe and try and convince them. And I think in local elections, for example, it's still something that is way more efficient than any Facebook page. Secondly, the medias in general actually have a lot as well, a lot of impact, whether it is local media in terms of local elections or even national medias. Then again, if you look at Macron's campaign, the medias made got a really big role into this campaign. In Germany as well, for example, the media coverage of the No GroKo movement led by the Jusos is also something that, of course, allows a great coverage and a great influence on people and on the public debates. And then comes social media, in my opinion, only at the last of the chain. And actually, it has way better influence in liability of elected members. I see that the elected members who actually talk about what they're doing day to day, whether it is local elected members or national elected members. Local elected members, when they manage to solve a problem with an elderly people who doesn't have access to hot water, for example, that's something that very much touches to the ground of politics, and that's actually something that makes the citizens more engaged, and nationally as well, when there is more involvement and more direct dialogue between citizens and the elected members on the social media, that has a lot of influence. In campaigning, it is very much limited because then people have the feeling that we are asking them to do something rather than, and then for the next 4 years we won't publish anything. Rather than if you keep talking about what you're doing and engaging with people on social media when you're elected, then people will make sure that you get re-elected because they have the feeling that your action is effective and has impact on their everyday life.
Excellent. That's very, very interesting. Thank you very much. And I like that. I think that's when you said it sort of came last in the chain, which might be a surprise for some people. So, the work has to be done in the face-to-face first, and then the more of the trust comes and the storytelling and the exchange afterwards on social media. But the face-to-face is the door opener, and that still local media has a real influence there. So it's a tool, but it's a tool to be deployed in the right way, and maybe it's a bit of a blunt instrument. Certainly in electioneering, because people in a way are too savvy. Am I being manipulated? It's a bit of a blunt instrument. So, very interesting. Thank you. Could I now turn to Yumi? Because we had a chat earlier and you talked about the responsibility of politicians to raise awareness about the EU and certain lack of interest in that at national level, certain ignorance. What are your thoughts there and how politicians use social media?
Well, thank you so much. I'm one of the very rare local politicians that are actually very much involved in the EU politics. There's just a handful of us throughout the European Union. Interesting, I'm not going into this discussion about the Spitzen candidate or not, because that's it's a different issue. But when it comes to the local politicians, I would say, I was looking at the election statistics throughout the different kind of EU countries, and it is sort of interesting because you can see the countries where there's a very low engagement by people and the countries where there's a very high voting engagement. And I would say I can see three kind of different issues about this. One thing is the education level of the country, if you vote or not, if you're interested. The second thing is actually the closeness to the EU institutions. If you feel that you are in the heart of the EU work, then you're more interested to go and vote. And the second thing is if you're EU skeptical or not, if the country is. And that is because I'm coming from Sweden. And Sweden is one of the countries that has maybe the very high education level, but we have very low participation in the EU election. Why? Because I believe that Sweden is a very EU-skeptical country, actually. Like you can see in England, it's also a very low interest in EU elections. The thing is that last election, 2014, there was a race in Sweden among the people that actually got over the EU average of voting. And I was thinking, why did that happen? And I believe that we were talking about EU in a different way that year because the EU election was the same year as the other elections in Sweden. So we were talking about this super election year. And media was talking about the super election year. And every politician was talking about the super election year. And the super election year was because the EU election was the same year. Mm-hmm. And that is why I believe that people suddenly got there to vote. Because they would suddenly realize that there's an EU that we can go vote for. And when it comes to local politicians, I would say that the knowledge about EU is extremely low, and the interest is extremely low about this because they're so occupied with their local politics. So starting to discuss what happens in the EU and how this will influence the work at the local level is very low. And I can see a couple of days ago, there was in media, they were discussing the EU, and they were comparing the countries that was actually losing in economically in the EU and the one that was benefiting from it. And I mean, if you talk about EU in this black and white, it is actually, I can say that it's sort of cheating to the people because you don't explain the good things and you don't explain the bad things in a proper way. And the local politicians don't know this either. So they can't explain this to their voters.
Okay.
So conclusion about this is, like I say, if local politicians and media don't have the knowledge about EU and they don't even believe in the EU project, how can local people get interested in the EU issues, and why should they go and vote?
Absolutely. And did I miss that? Was there any statistics on whether that must have been a kind of an EU comms person's dream, the double year, to get the national. Was there any statistics on whether there was more turnout for the EP? Do we know if the Swedes went out in force or?
No. You can see that because last 2014 there was over 50% of people gone voting, and we didn't vote that much for the first time when we said yes or no to EU, and otherwise the years in between we've always been below the EU average of voting, and there was nothing special, interesting in EU politics that was happening.
Okay, so thank you for that, and it's sort of that's a sort of a rather sad phrase to end on. Local politicians are ignorant. So if you've got this black and white view that's coming out and they don't know, and it's not finessed, then it's kind of like cheating the public, I think was your word. So we'll hold that thought there. Maxim, what did you hear? What would you like to add?
Well, indeed, the knowledge about Europe is very low because the first line media doesn't allow the room for the European story to be told, and it's very difficult for people to know what is going on in Europe because local governments don't give that room, and of course also not on social media. You need to put your local and national pride aside and make it into a real European one, and you need to show the citizens the truth about where your funding is coming from, where your ideas are coming from, where your network is coming from. And of course, as progressives in general, and certainly as a progressive mayor, for example, it's very difficult to get enough media coverage and to tell the whole story. And due to the rat race, you easily decide to give all the credits to yourself and to your own team, basically, and to the local level. This is, of course, the same problem for the European elections. But please, let's stop treating the European elections as they are not important enough for national party benefits. And this is a responsibility from all of us, because we are all responsible for what we share on social media. But of course, the bottom-up respect from the local level is of equal value, actually, to the top-down feedback from Europe to the local level. And by this, it's the task of the elected Europeans to have a dialogue with the local level and to communicate with more tailor-made subjects which tackle the real urban problems and the urban structure and its surroundings. And this is very important. And we also need to diversify our messages so that we can reach the right target groups and also the right generations. If you get this wrong, and if it gets, let's say, boring on social media, you lose specifically the young people and you will never get them back. Nowadays, it's very hard for us progressives to balance our messages on social media between telling the complete truth and telling the whole story and all its nuances. And of course, those stories are way harder to digest. It's a fast-moving media, so it's hard to tell the whole story. Or do we need to talk more in slogans and tell some half-truths in order to get the attention of specifically the young people. Of course, it is our task to bring some sort of, let's say, morality back to the social media, and we have to fight against those populist fake news media and those half-truths. But if we want to bring back the social media to neutral grounds and gain a lot of followers and also keep those followers, after that we can start talking about the long and difficult story. And then we can achieve what we really want to transfer in our message. We don't need to be afraid to use a bit of, let's say, I call it positive populism to reach that goal. The right-wing parties gave a negative connotation to that word, but if we use it wisely and if we can clear our view on the future and have a clear view on our final message we want to transfer, then we can make the social media, which is basically the incarnation of populism, into a platform of good information, understanding, and real debate. Platforms like the one of the Together initiative is the perfect start to achieve this.
Okay.
And so the final goal needs to be that this pulse of Europe becomes a real, strong, and reliable heartbeat again.
Thank you. Thank you. I think you sort of pick up, and we can talk a bit about that in what Clémence talked about. You know, it's what's the use? How do you use this instrument? You know, particularly in the targeting, and then what are the kinds of messages? Is it a door opener? Is it a not? Is it a door opener to further discussion? Do you need positive populism to open that door to then engage people in more conversation? So, and also you bring in the other media, and even top line media aren't really helping, whereas actually local media you talk about actually is much more beneficial to get those stories out there. So before I open to some comments, I know we do have a couple of students, but we do also have a policy advisor here from the Foundation for European Progressive Studies. We've got Maria Freitas. And what have you heard? I know you've got, you did a survey, did you not? And you had quite a few positive surprises in that survey. So if you've got a microphone there, perhaps you could tell us about some of that. To this lady, please. Thank you. Thank you, Maria.
Thank you very much. Yes, Kat, indeed. Sorry, I don't want to turn the back. Yes, Kat, indeed. So FAPS did a very, very big study called the Millennial Dialogue Project. And this was a very exciting initiative because it abided by a mantra that is really, really in the DNA of FEPS, the 3P rule. Progressive, participatory, and positive. I think this is so much important as well, what Joe and other speakers mentioned, to inject the sort of positivism that the millennial generation can bring about in these sort of debates, such as today, which is very timely, and that we're very, very grateful to be together again with the S&D group. Perhaps, Kat, if you'll allow me, I'll ask the audience, who has ever heard about the term millennial? Have you heard it in a negative term, millennials being disengaged, millennials not voting, millennials being apathetic? If yes, will you help me, Kat?
Yep.
Yeah.
Who says yes?
Why is this reoccurring negative narrative being attributed to this generation when we actually see the grassroots movements, Pulse of Europe, young people like the Millennial Dialogue ambassadors, like the Together ambassadors, that are really fighting there for a cause? But when we see, and this we saw from the survey results, 23,000 young people said the following: should there be elections tomorrow, we would definitely vote. But the reasons as well that they said that I would vote if my vote mattered. This is something that I think is very, very important for political parties and for us as progressives to understand. Why is there this moment where we see the energy, where we feel it, where we see it? We saw it in Brexit. I mean, here Nina very surely can attest to that. How young people went out there with the European flags. Why is this lost somehow in the process? So here, our research, not only on the millennials, but also together with Joe on the transnationalists, on the reform of political party structures, it's important to bring about openness in these structures, and the role of social media, because this is also something that we're talking here about. You were asking, Kat, is it an opening? Yes, indeed it is. But it should be an ongoing discussion. It should not only be in the run-up of the election and then the discussion dies. Because democracy is not just an exercise every 4 years. And all of us, and also being in a different side of the room after 4 years, because I was sitting on this side in 2013, 2014, listening to Joe and Julian Priestley, where it was the whole excitement about the Spitzenkandidatin and how it could bring about more trust in the European project, how it could actually make us millennials also be more engaged and be even more enthusiastic to go out there and make a change. I think that all of us here, not only as progressives, but all of us as millennials, as young people, we also have a role to go out there and to speak about Europe. Europe is always getting such a bad rap. It's not fair. Europe can be positive, it can be exciting. It can be more millennial.
Thank you very much. And yes, it does always get a bad rap, and I would agree with you that it can be exciting, and I don't think it's that difficult to explain the ways it is exciting, actually, but that's for another time. And again, you echo what I think you were saying, Clémence. You said, then that's when the engagement, you get people, well, you were talking about the election. You get people there on their doorstep, and then you engage in that ongoing discussion. And you're absolutely right, because your words also echo what I read somebody else on the Together platform had said is, we need to just stop. We can't be just thinking about elections every fight. We've got to be, it's all the stuff in between, because that's what gets people to go out there. So thank you very much for that. Hold that thought for one moment, if I may, because we do have two other people in the room, two students. Who have I got in the room? Sarah and Ricardo. Who have I got? Ricardo. Okay, so I'm going to do ladies first, if I may, please. So, yeah, of course. Do you have a microphone, my lovely? Where is that? Here is one coming. Thank you. Sarah Canali, what are your thoughts on social media? Do you use it? Are you a whiz? Do you know its limits? Go for it. Thank you.
Thank you very much in the first place to let me express my thoughts. And I would like to start my brief comment by reading your definition. And it's the definition of post-truth politics, according to the Oxford Dictionary, that says circumstances in which objective facts are less influential in shaping public opinion than appeals to emotion and personal belief. And I tend to consider this quote very important and to relate it to the issue of fake news that has been briefly mentioned by our panelists before. And nowadays, increasingly, fake news are shared at a fastest rate through social media, and of course this has an impact on the electoral decisions of the users of this social media. And the problem, according to me, lies on both sides. So we have a problem from the media companies and a problem from the users, because it feels like media want to tell us what we want to hear, and as well that we do not go further, we do not go beyond what we want to hear, and there is a strong instrumentalization of known true facts for political objectives, and this is true, for example, regarding the European elections as well, at least in my country. Where there is a strong misconception of Europe and of how it works, and it's very often reflected in the media, and people very often forget to critically think and analyze what they find written. And for this reason, I was wondering, and I was thinking to myself, how can we define and how can we redefine the concept of freedom of speech through social media if it can have a negative impact on the democratic and electoral participation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I think that's a very excellent thought that you came up with there. That's a big discussion over several dinner parties or nights in a bar, redefine the concept of freedom of speech and redefine the concept of democracy. I mean, this is a very difficult age, and getting through the noise and fighting that. And I think you, again, said two very critical words there, critical thinking. And how do you, so we get this information, but we have a responsibility to understand how to filter it and what we do if we are going to send it on. So thank you for that and the comment on post-truth politics. And now I turn to the other side of the room to Ricardo. Do you have a microphone, sir? You look very smart.
Thanks a lot. I would comment that graph, but I don't have time for that. I'm sorry, maybe next time. So I want to address the influence that the flood of disinformation and misinformation propagated through bots with malicious purposes has to the stability of our democracies. So recently we had in the US election, we had the EU referendum in the UK, the French presidential election last year. We have the same political actors, Russian bot accounts on Twitter and Facebook, and the alt-right from the US. So this sort of influence in social media platforms, actually, I'd like to add the following: according to the Atlantic Council, for instance, the next challenge now is the Italian general election, due to be held on the 4th of March this year. And we have the EU election next year, so we need to take into account also that the internet is basically regulated by the DMCA and DCA regulations, which dates back from 1996. And these regulations create incentives for platforms to largely avoid filtering or intervening in the content hosted on their services, simultaneously shielding them from liability for that content. So my question would be like, what can the EU do to prevent the flood of disinformation on the social media platforms? And I mean politically and legally.
Mm-hmm. Okay. We'll come to that. Thank you very much, and thank you for the question. And do you follow? Are you sort of au fait with what they're doing in the domain of digital and the digitalisation, the e-privacy, and the GDPR? And do you follow all that kind of thing with the EU and some of the fundamentals that are coming into play in May and June? Because that's a good place to start. But I'm not an expert. But we will.
I'm not an expert.
Okay, I'm certainly not an expert now. I've had to hear from a lawyer for about 3 hours on that, and poof, my head exploded. But we will come to that and see if anybody can contribute. I just want to hear from one more lovely lady here. Very different kind of intervention now. Sundas Bualam, because you're an assistant of an MEP. Here's this lady here. Have you got the mic? Oh, there you go. Sundas is assistant of MEP Boris Zala, and you've got a project. You've launched a project called Humans of the EU. Could you just very briefly spill the beans on that to the assembled company?
It's working. Okay. So very recently, actually, I launched this Facebook page called Humans of the EU, where the aim is to portray people working within the EU bubble, so at all functions and levels, and let it be within EU institutions, EU-funded initiatives, NGOs. Basically, the point of this page is to really show, and I'm picking up on remarks that have been said during the previous panel, it's to really show that there are humans working towards the European project, and it's not true that the EU is this big machine where people are disconnected from reality. On the contrary, it's full of human beings who are just like everyone else within the EU and all over the world, and they do what they do because they believe in the EU, and they work with all their core towards this project. So I think it's important to show this human face of the European project for people to really be able to relate to this. And, well, I may be biased because I'm SND, but I just want to say that I feel SND is also a group that really cares about people, and that it's a political group that is very human. And this is what politics is about. I feel like maybe some citizens feel that politics is something that they can't reach to anymore, but actually politics is about making the world a better place, in a sense. So thank you for letting me present this.
And it's a great project because, as we heard acknowledged earlier, MEPs can't always be everywhere. So it's a great product. It is in terms of.
If anybody wants their portrait taken, please contact me.
Yeah, you're going to get an absolute rush. Okay, so three comments, three questions for the panel from the floor. Do I have any? Three questions. I have a gentleman here. Anybody else? Gentleman over here, if we can get, and there's another gentleman there. So we'll start with this man with his lanyard on. We'll start with the gentleman with the black spotty tie, and then we'll see where we go. So nice and concise, and please do stand and say who you are.
Well, thank you very much for those very interesting debates and presentations. I'm a trainee at the S&D group, and was just a remark because we always talk about social media, blah, 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 but I wonder where there isn't any European CNN so that we could have real debates on what is the position of the S&D on this matter or this matter, and why is it different from the one of the EPP, so that people would vote because they know, okay, I'm really more S&D because they reflect what I think, what the EPP doesn't. Mm-hmm. So that's my question. Thank you very much.
You still have EPTV, which actually did exactly that, in a sense, online broadcasting, which has been going on for quite a few years, which had real broadcast quality programming on different channels. So that is one idea, but I don't know, perhaps we can have some thoughts on that. So thank you. Why can't we have a CNN so we can have real debate so people can then engage in the critical thinking to see how to move forward? Okay, the gentleman with the tie. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Rory, trainee at the European Parliament. I suppose it's a question more about the slide of socialism generally in Europe, like with PSOE or SPD, Benoit Hamon, another good example. So when are we going to stop, and when are we going to learn some lessons? When are we actually going to wake up and realise that things are not going great and we need to change it? And how can we go about that? And it has to be about offering not only democratic participation but also a vision. And I think we need to look at that ourselves and actually think about what that means and how we're going to speak to a person on a bus out there and not just a room full of people in suits and nice spotty ties. Mm-hmm. So I think let's talk.
And what do you think? What's your idea for that change, for that vision? What's your idea?
I think we have to look around and we have to actually think about what is the fundamental difference between us sat here as an EPP group or us sat here as an S&D group. And I think, in a way, it's about having a vision that can appeal to different people.
And you don't think there's enough? You don't think some of these values are enough? You don't think the vision's enough, let alone the fact it's not being communicated?
Working. I mean, if we're going to learn something from nation states too, then we need to look at the erosion of the centre left or left leaning parties on a European level, and we actually need to really have a phase change or see what happens next.
I would have more parked your comment in the first discussion, but I don't mind you've said it now.
It was on my mind.
We're just working up to it. So, okay, you're fabulous. Okay, thank you very much. No, I take your point. I hear you. Anybody else from this side of the room? Anybody else who's got a question or a comment? Don't be shy. I can't see if there's anything on Twitter. It's not very easy for me. Is it going to be nice and short? Fabulous. Will you give me time to put my headset on? Is it something to do with social media? A conversation? Okay.
Well, ik denk niet dat we het pad moeten opgaan naar minder sociale media en dat een beetje fnuiken, maar misschien extra voor de jeugd, misschien meer inzetten op onderzoeksjournalistiek, meer naar de bibliotheek gaan, meer de straat op gaan en kijken wat dat er gebeurt. En ik denk dat dat die weg is dat het terug moet opgehaald worden.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so a different kind of responsibility and evidence-based and with your eyes and not just sort of automatically sending things on. Okay, I just... Yeah.
A lot of things about level and so on, and also the samenwerking between parliaments.
Okay.
And that's the way you can
engage. Okay. Okay, I'm going to park it, but thank you. Okay, but I hear what you're saying needs to be more research-based, evidence-based journalism getting out there. So, a few things there. So I'm trying to tie it all together with social media, not necessarily, but I don't know whether, perhaps Michelle, there was a question that came here particularly in the combating of fake news, particularly in understanding the whys, whens and wherefores of how to put out that news in that maelstrom. Can you comment on what the EU is doing, what its responsibilities are, how it's getting involved?
Well, I don't have particular expertise on the data privacy legislation that was mentioned in the discussion, but the European Union, just like the American government, has become very concerned about the presence of fake news and the influence of foreign powers in the elections. And this is something that is being taken up with the individual companies, especially Facebook, to try to go and see if something can be done on that level. But it is quite difficult. It had led to a turnaround from the president of Facebook, from Mark Zuckerberg, who initially had a very hands-off, well, this is what people are posting, so this is what people are posting, to seeing, what can be done through Facebook itself to go and limit that. But that seems to be what
Why
the
did he suddenly
direction
engage?
is.
Because he realised that there was a groundswell of demand for that engagement, or I would imagine.
Yeah.
Okay, so Clémence, did you want to say something on this?
I just wanted to go back, especially from everything that has been said. And for example, the question of the localities against the European Union. I think this is the highest misconception, actually. I do believe that nowadays the local powers and the local elections are actually the main reason why people still vote, and especially still vote on the left. If you look, let's say, in Hénin-Beaumont, which is a city in France which used to be communist and is now the Front National, people there are going to vote, and they're going to vote for National Front just because the majority over there has switched. If you look at localities where the Socialist Party in France, I know it's not many anymore, but where they do, where they are in majority, where they do a good job, people go and vote, and people go and vote for the left because they can feel the practical effect that the political power have on their own lives. And I do believe that localities have a responsibility to engage in citizens, especially to engage them and to politically, in terms of, okay, well, you do vote on the local level, you need also to vote on the European level, because there are these decisions that are made on the European level. But to be honest, the local elected members are sometimes the main reason why people still vote on the left in some countries, especially. And like you mentioned, of course, there is a fall of the social democracy in Europe in many countries, not everywhere, of course, but in many countries. And the question being, when are we going to wake up? I think we have woken up. We are very much, we understand very much the situation, and that we are in a very complicated situation right now everywhere in Europe. I don't think anyone can say otherwise these days. But the question is, which direction do we take? And I think there is an argument to be made that we do need to rebuild the left in a very broad manner, to engage more and more people, and make sure that we build something that is more common and that is indeed an alternative to the EPP or to the right proposition in Europe. And when some initiatives go more from a restricted definition of what is to be social and Democrats, what is to be socialist. I think this is the main mistake. I think when you're 10 people voting for the left in some instances, then you do need to gather and make sure that you build an alternative project that is common. And
Can I ask you to wind up?
Very quickly on the fake news question, I think there's definitely a big argument to be made on educating, especially the children now, not necessarily on new technologies, etc., because they're going to switch, they're going to evolve, but most and foremost on checking the sources, making sure that the data you're using is actually a valuable source of information, and not, making Wikipedia diabolic, but using Wikipedia for example, to check the sources and making making sure that the information you're using is valuable, and that will be the main part into fighting fake news for the future. And secondly, also showing the people the benefits of politics. I mean, beyond communication, if people feel, and that's the thing, we have Europeanized most policies that are, the countries have Europeanized policies that don't make them gain votes or economics, etc., but have kept the education policies, the social policies. So if you Europeanize this as well, then the citizens will also understand and feel the benefits of the European Union.
Thank you. No, that's okay. And you are extremely eloquent. I've just got my eye on the clock and the fact that there is a restaurant to get to, but otherwise you are all good. And I think just to say, if you haven't had quite your answer, I do suggest you go online. Please do look at the GDPR coming up in May, June. Look at everything that's been discussed in the Parliament around e-privacy, and you also need to look at everything that DG Connect and other Directorates General are doing in the domain of digital literacy. It is a big topic for them: digitisation, digital skills and jobs, cyber citizens, netiquette, all of that. That is all. I know the EU is on it. So if you want to find out from a legislative point of view and from an initiatives point of view, go online and take a look. I think you will find a lot there. I just want to come to you, Yumi, if I may. Do you have anything to say on this? Because we are looking at social media, we're looking at the value of it, we're looking at where we need to be careful about it. This lady here talked about the critical thinking and how that's very important. Anything you said? Interestingly, you say that a lot of MPs know nothing about Europe, and yes, a lot of MEPs do tweet. They do put stuff out there. What do we see in Sweden in terms of fake news and the conversations around it in a nutshell, and how what's the landscape there? What sort of debates are you having?
One of the difficulties with social media, it's very difficult to actually, run and to go out and have a discussion on the right information about things. And it's very easy to put all this scary information, and they're spreading like wild. And whenever there's something negative or scary, it spreads very good. But if it's some good news, no one is interested in spreading it, Like I say, when I'm putting out that I'm doing some good things in the EU, no one's especially interested. But if I put up my cat's been to the veterinary, there'll be tons of likes about this. So I mean, social media works like that, and you have to understand that. And that is why it is so important to have more. Also, what I call more traditional media, so some of that more serious, that actually can do this better research about what is right and what is wrong, and we don't have that enough, actually, because media and journalists. The very few of them that actually know EU politics enough, and especially not at the local level, because most people read the newspapers and media at the local levels, and they don't actually know more about these things than the people that read in the newspapers. And this is for me such a big problem, because if they can't write the right facts or the right arguments in the media, newspapers and in television and radio, I mean, who's going to go out with the information? And I mean, the local politicians. I mean, I often hear people saying that, what are you doing in Brussels? I mean, you're a local, you're mayor at home, you should be at home doing the politics. And I said, but I discuss exactly the same thing in Brussels as I discuss home. I'm talking about schools, I'm talking about education, I'm talking about broadband and internet, I'm talking about how to go to social welfare to people. I'm talking about the things that is good for my people at home, but I'm doing it at another kind of level, and I can influence the decisions earlier before it comes down to me as a mayor. And when I say this to people, they understand that. Say, oh, well then it's good. But I mean, there are too few of us talking about this.
And do you talk about it on social? Do you then explain that on social media? Are you just in a very nutshell, because I need to bring this to a close? Are you active on social media?
Yes, on my Facebook and so on. But I mean, I could be more. But I'm not sure how many people I would actually reach.
But it's got to start somewhere, as we said here. Let's not assume. No, just say, and I will close it. But just to say, because if you're saying something is very simple, you say, but hang on, I'm going to Brussels and I'm talking about exactly the same things I'm talking about at national level. Well, that's a great thing to tweet. speaks, because it's very, very clear. But I'm going to park it there because I want to have the last word from Maxime. You've heard lots of different things from, all of our discussants here. You said, first line media. You heard of somebody call there, why can't we have a kind of a CNN where we debate things and then we can critically think and then we know how to go forward. Last words, please, from you.
I will stick to Clément's comment. Indeed, local communities are still the reason why we go to vote. And actually, if we project Europe on a city like Bruges, it's actually the same. Europe is very diverse. There are living a huge amount of people with diverse background, diverse histories, diverse traditions. And that's the same in the city. So if we start working in the city and start to understand each other, start to understand your neighbor, we automatically will become more progressive because we know why we are going to vote and for what we are going to vote. But of course, a lot of people also went to vote the previous time, and they did now. But where is the feedback? It is our task to give feedback in a tailor-made way. Social media is made to limit your target groups, so please, let's use it in that way. And if we understand each other's problems, and I come back to Bruges, it's a bit like our common bridges. And if we don't agree on our common bridges, nothing will move, and there will be no pearls in your city, and there will be no pearls in Europe. That's basically it.
Thank you very much. Just before you leave, I'd like to do a quick poll. It's an obvious one again, but taking, the good and the bad of social media, the fake news, the possibility to critically think, to open doors, to then continue discussions. Do you think, in general, that the impact of social media can be positive, is positive in terms of citizen participation in elections today, in general, national or EU level? Who thinks it's positive? Who thinks social media can be a force for good? So just the green, force for good. Don't want to see the red. Just a force for good, unless you're somewhere in between. You're doing this slight wavy thing. Okay, who thinks it's absolutely the demon? And very high up there. No thanks. Worst idea until the wooden horse. And somewhere in between. Yeah, it's how it's you. I would agree with you. Someone. I love that lovely regal wave like the Queen. Okay, so thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Can you please give these four panellists a very, very warm round of applause? Thank you. You may take your seats. Okay. Thank you to you all. You may take your seats. We are very much on the home straight. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I am going to shortly release you for food and drink. Further conversation. Just don't be too noisy. I promise you, we got 10 minutes. And you must be alert for this lovely lady because she's worth it being alert for. Can I please ask Tuulia Pitkäinen, the Secretary General of Young European Socialists, to ascend? And I think you are going to present the ambassadors. Yeah, would you like to call them? Please, come here. Yes, indeed. You may. I will sit right over there.
Oh, perfect. Thank you very much. So my name is Tuulia Pitkäinen, and I'm the Secretary General of Young European Socialists. So the Young European Socialists is the umbrella organization of all of the socialist and social democratic youth organizations all over Europe. We bring together around 60 different youth organizations. So we are so far, at least for now, we are the biggest party political youth organization in Europe, which is something we can all be very proud of here. So, first of all, I would really like to thank the group for this debate and this event today, really, because the subject of democracy is often in Europe addressed as something that's not really our problem, because we have the democracy and we are the home of democracy. But as we can see from these very, very great speeches over here, it really is a question, because the shared reality is changing a lot. If you think about the students who were studying here in the College of Europe in the 90s, you would think about what is their shared reality is based on 6 newspapers and 2 radio channels and 2 TV channels. And then that's the starting point for the discussion. And now if you look at the news feed of me or the Secretary General of the EPP Youth, it's completely different. So when it comes to democracy, this is also an important point. But nevertheless, this is a question that has to be addressed, and I'm very happy that the S&D group in the European Parliament has already started to address this changing way of discussion, and that the group has actually created this platform that's called the Together platform, where it is possible for anyone openly online to discuss and to debate and to contact the group about political subjects and declarations that are also addressed here in these events. So that's also been a great initiative, and thank you for that for the group. And it's my pleasure to tell you that the group has named 2 ambassadors who have been very active in this online platform that I encourage all of you to check out if you already haven't. I understood that there's been a lot of engagement this time, which is great. But now I would like to give the stage to the ambassadors who are Maximo Ploseco and André Branco Pereira.
Okay, I'm going to try to keep it short since we've already heard a lot of interesting people. Okay, so my name is Maximo. I come from Spain and I study economics here at the College of Europe. Okay, so democratic participation in the European elections is low. We've been hearing about that. But that's just really a symptom of structural failures in our democratic system. This is what I believe. So I just wanted to bring these last remarks a little bit back to basics. Because to have a real democracy, you need a lot of elements, and it's very complex. But a very essential thing is having informed and engaged citizens. But, engaging in the public debate, spending the time to join a grassroots organization or reading about policy, it really is a luxury. So really don't expect those stuck in poverty or those struggling to provide for their families to engage in the public debate and in the democratic process. So if we want to reinforce democracy, but we want to do it from the foundations and we want to do it sustainably and on the long term, we really need to reduce inequalities. We really need to reform the labor market. We really need to shorten the working week. Maybe we need to put a basic income in place. So even if we make some short-term reforms, which I really agree to the reforms that have been discussed today, I really believe that we have to put the beacon of equality and inclusion in the center to guide us, as the only way forward towards a healthy democracy. And if the EU really, makes a real effort towards poverty reduction and makes a real effort, to put inclusion in the agenda, then, this will spark enthusiasm among the people. And then people will stop seeing the EU as this corporate-driven project, which my friends back home, really believe. And there is a last element that I believe it's very important, and it's for people to really believe that they can change things. So we've also been discussing about this. We need to bring the EU back to the people. Daniel, I don't know where is him from Eurocities. I think he gave some really good ideas about allowing citizens to engage in real decision making, not just give some ideas, but really to make the EU participatory. So in conclusion, I think by coincidence, my remarks were very similar to those by Maria. The 3 Ps, I think that's really what we believe. So we need the first progressive P to be about reducing inequalities and making this society more fair. The second P, it's about positivism. So we need to put the social back, in the European project, and the third P was the participatory. So we need to bring the EU really closer to citizens. Thank you.
So hi everyone, I'm André from Portugal.
I study law at the University of Lisbon. So thank you very much for inviting me to talk here with you. So I think these Together events are really important because they bring together mayors, they bring together EU leaders, EU decision policymakers with regular citizens. And this is really important because, let's face it, there is a really lack of engagement of citizens with the EU and EU matters. And these events talk about EU matters. And I think part of the reason is that many people discuss only citizenship participation of Europeans only from 5 to 5 years. And democracy is much more than a quinquennial event where people go to the polls. Democracy is also about knowing your rights, your citizenship, being aware of ways how you can shape and change your institutions. So my challenge to the S&D and to you is that we have to lay the groundwork, like we are doing here with these Together events, lay the groundwork, build a democratic infrastructure to make people participate more actively and regularly in many other ways than not just voting. Because if we do that, after people will vote more naturally. So my idea, the idea I put on the comment in the platform was participatory budgets. So participatory budgets are when the government or the city allocates part of their budget for the citizens to discuss, debate and decide directly about some matters they think it's important. And this experience, it was experienced in many cities. And for example, I know the example of Lisbon, and it was a really good example. It was so good that Portugal make it like a national thing, and the government of Portugal allocates 3 million euros of their budget to citizens to decide it. And I think it's not that much, but it's a start. And I see citizens that probably are not interested in politics, but they are eager to discuss, to talk with policymakers, with specialists about how they can change, what they can change with those 3 millions. And I think it's really important, it's really successful, and I think if we put in practice these ideas that are not just about going to vote, then we are going to improve the participation of citizens, and the citizen awareness of the European Union will make it better. Thank you.
Thank you, both of you. Thank you. Sorry, and really thank you for some very, very pertinent points about participatory budgets. I think you make a very, very good point there about, if we reduce inequalities, you're going to get voters out there, and also, to stop the EU being seen by some as a very corporate-driven project. So thank you for your very, very intelligent contributions. So we're nearly there, but I would, before we segue into the second part of the evening, I would like to please welcome Udo Bullmann, who is MEP and acting president of the S&D Group, for the adoption of the statement and conclusions. Thank you.
Hi everybody, and thanks for this marvelous event, to all that have been involved in the preparation, to the speakers, to the distinguished guests, to the audience. It is exciting to be here in Bruges, and you can feel, let me call it, the young spirit of this place, of this college. I admire just our two young men being so creative, being so innovative, the ambassadors of Together. Please do us, the MEPs, the S&D Group, one favor. Please go further, being innovative, stick to this intelligent contributions, give the best of your ideas to this political process. We need you. This is the message of today. We Socialists and Democrats in the European Parliament, we have the firm belief that you have, as progressives, to always be on top of your time, on top of modern technologies, of course on top social media, innovative bridges to groups and individuals in society, and nobody should beat us on that. Our press activities, our newly reformed Department of Communication is proof for that we try to be as close to people as possible. let me make one distinction. For us, modern technologies are not neutral techniques. They are means of understanding each other, of understanding of social processes, the change in the world, the situation of very often deprived individuals and social groups, and they are means in order to change the world to the better. Technology is nothing if you do not know how to use it, if you do not have a social and political purpose that you combine with the use of technologies. And let us also understand the cleavages of our modern societies. We are talking about Eurosceptics, skepticism, and many, many people turning their back on Europe and the European project. Let us understand them. It's not about blaming the Eurosceptic ordinary people. We would like to blame them in governments and in enterprises who make them Eurosceptics. We have to find the reasons why this is going to happen. Let me give you an example, historical example. This place, 30 years ago, we had a British lady here, Margaret Thatcher. She gave a famous speech in this college, and I quote her. We would like to quote. She said, "Britain does not dream of some cozy, isolated existence on the fringes of the European community. Our destiny is in Europe as part of the community." This was Maggie Thatcher. What a lie. What a misunderstanding. And now we're getting closer to the question why that is going to happen and why things like that are going to happen. We have the Brexit some kilometers from here, Nina, unfortunately, on the agenda. Look, if you do everything, and one participant asked for the distinction between the S&D and the Conservatives and what are the differences and what is our problem. If you do everything to ruin your social welfare state, if you do everything to undermine the solidarity in your communities, if you do not care about poor people in your villages and neighborhoods, how can you believe that people have trust in the political system back home or in the political system in Brussels? This is a lie. Insofar, our firm belief is, as Socialists and Democrats, social inclusion, a healthy economic environment, our fight for qualified and better jobs of the future, modern technologies that preserve the planet and do not ruin the planet, a concept of sustainability which we are going to develop in these days together in our group, in the parliamentary group of Socialists and Democrats. This is the answer. And social inclusion of each and everybody, the hopes of individuals to participate in economic and in social life, and democratic participation, being part of the electorate, being an active citizen, not only on social media, not only in the dialogue in the neighborhood, but also going to vote for progressive parties. These are sisters. You cannot have democratic participation without social inclusion, and social inclusion without an economic future for each and any family without democratic participation is dictatorship. So we are working, this is the single party that is working for both. We are working for inclusion, an economic sustainable future, and for democratic participation on top of the modern world. Let me finish by addressing ourselves. I'm fighting in my home country in Berlin, I'm fighting in Brussels, I'm fighting together with my friends in the S&D for the PSE, our mother, our European mother party, to do a radical change. If we would like have citizens' commitment and engagement in our political processes, we have to become a real European party. not only an alliance of national parties. The PSE, the Party of Social Democrats in Europe, has to become a membership organization, where when you go to a membership in a national party, you automatically have the chance to also be a member of the European Socialists and Democrats Party, the PSE. So this is our future, and only if we are able to get this breakthrough against the one or the other national gatekeeper, then we will win the young people to commit themselves to our political family. I would invite everybody from you to help us forward on that. Today we have a declaration. The declaration was elaborated during the meeting here. It was also included what and good ideas we had in the internet communication. So we have finalized this declaration, the Declaration of Bruges. It will be, together with all our other declarations, made public, and it will be communicated. And I thank you for that help today during our meetings here, and for your input on this joint declaration. Thank you very much. All the best. And involve yourself. Keep on fighting.
Thank you very, very much for your final words. Thank you in particular for, I liked what you said about social and political purpose has to go in line with knowledge of technologies. It's no point in having the knowledge of technologies or absolutely not knowing technologies without social and political purpose. And of course, social inclusion goes hand in hand with democratic participation. Thank you very much. That concludes the first part of the evening. The night is still young. We are in Bruges. I had to ask this when I wrote this script. Who in this room has not seen the film In Bruges? Seriously? Oh, I thought I would have no one raise their hands. Okay, so that means more merriment, more stimulating conversation is in order. Please, just a moment, before you grab your coat and run for the door and run for some air. It's a 5-minute walk, by the way, to the dinner venue. Can I just say some very important thank yous? That's important. To all our wonderful, wonderful speakers for taking the time and trouble to come here and download the contents of your brains, and every second be whipped by me into finishing. So I really, really appreciate that. Can you please give them a warm round of applause again? I also thank very, very much the interpreters for their fabulous brain trickery, and I really apologise. I know I spoke too fast. I'm sorry, but thank you very much for keeping up with me. Can we give them a very warm round of applause? Thank you to the technicians for keeping the lights on, to everybody who was working in the social media team, to the communications team who put this whole thing together. They're a nightmare to put together events. We know this. Thank you very much to you, our live and virtual audiences, for turning up and tuning in and not tuning out, and for all of your contributions. We really do appreciate it. Can I just ask, who in this room has a nugget of something new to reflect upon, or goes away with some level of enthusiasm? Raise your hand if there's something you heard that was new, that you can think about, that you can pass on, that you can be a valuable multiplier. I don't know why I said that in American. I'm very sorry, but I did. Okay, great. Just one last anecdote from me, and then I think you might sing and have a photo. One very important thing, kind of in answer to you, sir, and forgive me, I think you said about connecting with people on park benches and in buses, but I might have slightly. I will say this, as a sad Brexit, well, I didn't vote Brexit, but as a sad person, sad and angry person all the time. There we go. When I last left London a couple of weeks ago, I was in an Uber. I was going to King's Cross, and probably because I was leaving the UK for a bit and coming back to Brussels, I was chatting and sort of forcing the poor taxi driver to get into a conversation about Brexit. And in the course of it, I was just distilling my points of view like this and saying, oh, and he was talking, and I was saying, yes, but, and actually had you thought, oh, by the way, did you know, and blah, blah, blah. And I came to the end to jump out, and I said, oh, Jesus, you're going to give me like minus stars on the, you know, you rate it on Uber, aren't you? And he said to me, actually, do you know what? I wish I could give you 10 stars because you have actually succeeded in shifting my opinion in that one taxi conversation. So do not underestimate the value of you as multipliers, okay? That's it. I think now, is there photos and singing? Does everybody need to stand? Everyone come, speakers to come forward, please.
Can I just ask a warm applause for Katrina for a job wonderful done today.
Thank you very much. Speakers come to the front. And discussants. Speakers and discussants and panellists and everybody. And together ambassadors and everybody. Who is everybody? Can you come here? Thank you. Come forward. Thank you. Push the chairs in. You have to do 2 rows. Yeah, tall people at the back, small people in the front.
Tall and small.
Yeah, I think you can go in the front.
Hi.
Right.
Come a bit nearer.
Move along to the even. Double row, go in the back. Tall people in the back. Tall people come in. And turn to the side. You have to do like this. Turn in. You have to do the Miss World. Miss World.
I'm good. Where to look, right? Nice anthem.
Okay.
If you want to sing, please one more. I'm in the European House.
Okay, you are released. You need to grab your coats, and it's a 5-minute. Oh, it's a 5-minute walk.
We had somebody from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and we had, circular economy is always a nice one. It was very good.
Thank you very much.
I will come for a bit. Yes, I think I need to introduce the mayor of Bruges and Kathleen
Grazie.